Hi guys and welcome to Last Light Radio Channel. Tonight we step into colonial America in the year 1770, where the language of liberty drifts through taverns, courtrooms and candlelit parlours, while countless black Americans wake inside a very different reality. You can almost hear it already, can't you? The creak of wagon wheels in wet dirt, the clatter of hooves on uneven street stones, the low murmur of men praising freedom with powdered wigs perched neatly above their ears. And yet, just out of sight, another world moves beneath that talk, quieter but heavier, marked by forced labour, watchful eyes, and lives measured in somebody else's account book. It is a strange place to enter at night, and stranger still to stay long enough to feel how ordinary cruelty can become. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you're here, comment with your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, and let your eyes adjust to the soft dark of a colonial evening. The air smells of smoke, damp wood, sweat, and the faint sourness of animals kept too close to people. Somewhere, nearby, tallow candles burn with a greasy scent. Their light is weak and yellow, fluttering against rough walls and drafty windows. You stand in a world that likes to speak grandly about order, duty, and Christian virtue. It simply leaves out the part where that order is built by people denied the right to order their own lives. You move slowly down a narrow street in a port town, perhaps Boston, perhaps Charleston, perhaps Newport, perhaps Philadelphia. The details change from colony to colony, but one thing remains stubbornly clear. Black labour is everywhere. You hear it in the scrape of barrels unloaded at the docks, in the crack of kindling split before dawn, in the iron ring of a blacksmith's hammer, in the brush of brooms over floorboards, in the whisper of laundry worked in cold water until fingers sting. Nothing in this place feels untouched by black hands, even when white colonists pretend not to notice. That contradiction sits over the colonies like a low cloud. In 1770, many white Americans are already arguing bitterly with Britain over taxes, representation, and rights. They write pamphlets, they give speeches, they toast liberty in crowded rooms smelling of ale and pipe smoke. Yet nearly 1/5 of the population in the mainland British colonies is of African descent, and the great majority of those people are enslaved, in South Carolina and Virginia especially. Plantation wealth depends on their labour. In northern towns, slavery is often smaller in scale, but it is still real, still legal in many places, still woven into homes, businesses, and ports. Freedom is praised loudly. Freedom is also rationed very carefully. You feel that fact not as an abstract idea, but as pressure in the chest. The colony is full of categories, each one trying to pin a human being in place, enslaved, free, bound, owned, hired out, runaway, mulatto, negro, child, wench, boy. Each label is meant to reduce a life to a useful shape, very tidy, very convenient, very cruel. Night settles deeper, a dog barks in the distance. Somewhere, a baby cries and is hushed. The boards beneath your feet are uneven, and the cold slips through the soles of your shoes. You begin to notice how power sounds in this world. It sounds like keys at a belt. It sounds like a man's voice calling another person by a first name only, or by no name at all. It sounds like laughter from a dinner table while someone stands behind the chair, waiting to refill a cup. The sound is not always loud. Not always. That is part of what makes it unsettling. You enter a kitchen where the heat from the hearth presses softly against your face. Iron pots hang blackened by years of smoke. Ash settles into the cracks of brick. A woman bends over a kettle, her sleeves rolled, her posture already tired though the work is not done. She may be enslaved by the family who eats in the next room. She may have been born in the colony, or forced across the Atlantic years earlier. Historians can trace some lives through bills of sale, church records, runaway notices, and probate inventories, but countless others remain only faint outlines, glimpsed for a moment and then swallowed by silence. Even now, scholars still debate how much of daily interior life can be recovered from records written, mostly by the people who claimed ownership over others. the archive whispers. It rarely sings. Still, enough survives to let you feel the shape of a day. For many black Americans in 1770, life is ruled by labour from first light until exhaustion. On plantations, work may begin before sunrise, with tasks stretching under heat, insects, mud, and supervision. In towns, labour can be domestic, skilled, maritime, or mixed together in whatever way the household or business demands. Enslaved dock workers haul cargo, coopers shape barrels, carters move goods, cooks prepare meals, laundresses scrub linen, nursemaids soothe white children while worrying over their own. There is no clean division between public and private burdens. Work seeps into everything. And because this is bedtime history, we can admit one darkly ridiculous truth. The same colonists who fret over imported tea can be astonishingly relaxed about imported human beings. They may complain for an hour over British policy, then ring a bell for service without a tremor of self-awareness. Humanity can be very theatrical that way. Powders its wig, quotes a philosopher, misses the point entirely. You step back outside, the moon is thin. The cold air bites more sharply now, carrying river damp and chimney soot. A group of men passes, their boots tapping the road. Their conversation is animated, half political grievance and half gossip. Nearby, an enslaved man shoulders a load in silence. His body is close enough to them to catch every word about liberty. Close enough to know those words are not meant for him. Not quite. Not yet. Maybe not ever. In some colonies, free black people walk these same roads, though never with full ease. Freedom, when it exists, is fragile. Papers can be demanded. Assumptions can turn dangerous. Kidnapping free black people into slavery is not some wild fantasy whispered to scare children. It happens. So even a person legally free may live under constant proof, constant explanation, constant risk of being challenged by any white stranger bold enough to make suspicion feel like law. The town itself is a patchwork of sounds and smells that never fully settle. Salt from the harbour, molasses leaking from casks, horse dung on packed earth, fresh bread from a bakehouse, rot from refuse piles, pine smoke, wet wool, tar, rum. The world feels crowded, and every object seems handmade, repaired, reused, or mended. You brush a wall and feel splintered wood. You step past stacked crates stamped with names from distant ports. The Atlantic world is always present here. Ships do not just bring goods. They bring news, fashions, disease, hunger, and people held in chains. By 1770, the transatlantic slave trade has been operating in British America for generations. That means black life in the colonies is no longer only the story of arrival. It is also the story of birth, family, language, adaptation, memory, and survival. Many enslaved people in the colonies are American-born by this date, especially in the Chesapeake. Others still carry direct memories, or inherited memories, of West and Central African homelands. Cultural traditions travel in fragments, foodways, naming practices, rhythms, craft knowledge, spiritual understandings. Tiny continuities survive where brute force tried to erase them. A quirky little detail lingers in the candlelight. Some enslaved and free black people in urban areas become highly skilled in trades that their enslavers rely on, but never fully understand. A master may profit from an enslaved carpenter's precision or a sailor's knowledge of tides, while privately fearing the very competence that keeps his household standing. Imagine resenting the person who literally knows how to build your roof. History does sometimes wear clown shoes, yet competence offers no guarantee of safety. Skill can increase value in the market, which is hardly comforting when your market value is itself the problem. To be praised as useful while denied personhood is one of the sharpest insults this century can offer. Useful hands, useful back, useful womb, useful child. The language of usefulness circles like a fly over everything. You pause beside a meeting house where a faint line of lamplight shows beneath the door. Religion matters in colonial life, but it does not flatten it into kindness. Some white Christians defend slavery as natural, lawful, even benevolent if managed with proper discipline. Others express discomfort or outright criticism. Quakers in particular begin to voice stronger anti-slavery objections in parts of the North, though action is uneven and hardly universal. Black Americans, enslaved and free, also shape religious life in ways too often ignored, bringing spiritual traditions into hidden prayer meetings, church attendance, and personal acts of faith that do not depend on white approval. Belief can comfort. Belief can also become a language of endurance. In a yard behind a house, you hear soft voices. The conversation is low, careful, threaded with pauses. Privacy is scarce, so speech learns to bend. A joke may hide complaint. A song may carry memory. A warning may travel inside a casual phrase. This is not romance. It is strategy. Historians still argue over how much coded communication can be confidently identified in surviving evidence, because later generations sometimes read meanings backward into the silence. Even so, no serious observer doubts that people under surveillance develop subtle ways to speak, signal, and protect one another. You notice the sky clearing overhead, a scatter of cold stars above roofs and chimneys. The beauty feels almost rude. How dare the night be lovely when the human arrangements below are so ugly? And still, that is history for you. A frost-edged fence rail can look silver in moonlight, while injustice hums steadily nearby. Both things can be true at once. As you continue, you begin to understand that life for Black Americans in 1770 cannot be reduced to one setting or one rhythm. A rice plantation in the Carolina Low Country is not a Boston merchant's household. A tobacco field in Virginia is not a New York dockyard. Conditions vary by region, the season, occupation, and the temperament of enslavers, though temperament is a poor shield against a system built on force. Some enslaved people live in larger communities, with more chances to exchange news and sustain custom. Others are isolated in smaller northern households, trapped under intimate scrutiny. Neither setting is gentle. They are simply cruel in different textures. That texture matters. In the Low Country, the air can be heavy with marsh smell and mosquitoes, the fields wet around your legs, the heat wrapping itself around your lungs. In the Chesapeake, tobacco labour stains the fingers and bends the back under a long summer sun. In a northern household, winter cold crawls into your bones while you haul water, carry coal, and rise in darkness to light someone else's fire. The body remembers everything. The body becomes the ledger no court records fully keep. And yet, despite every attempt to grind life into labour alone, Black Americans in 1770 remain more than the work extracted from them. They form attachments. They laugh. They grieve. They judge people sharply, and often correctly. They raise children when they can. They decorate spaces with what little is available. They cook with intelligence and improvisation. They sing. They pray. They negotiate tiny pockets of dignity inside a system designed to deny dignity altogether. This should not feel surprising, but history has a bad habit of acting startled whenever oppressed people remain recognisably human. The candle hour grows later. The taverns quiet a little. Hooves become less frequent on the road. Somewhere, the harbour water nudges wood against wood with a hollow knock. You stand still and let the colony breathe around you. It is a place obsessed with rank and display, yet held together by hidden strain. White colonists speak of rights while buying and selling people. They talk of civilization while using whips, auctions, patrols, and legal restrictions to maintain it. They congratulate themselves for refinement while depending on unfree labour to keep linen clean and plates warm. Very polished, very fragile. If you listen closely enough, you can hear the century shifting under its own contradictions, not resolving them. Certainly not yet. Just tightening. The language of freedom is getting louder. The reality of bondage is impossible to miss once you refuse to look away. For Black Americans in 1770, that tension is not a philosophical puzzle discussed over candles and Madeira. It is the weather of daily life. It settles on the skin. It shapes each hour. It teaches caution, endurance, and a constant reading of danger. So you remain here for a final quiet moment, breathing in smoke and salt and the fading warmth from a nearby hearth. You let the sounds grow softer. A door closes, A cart rattles in the distance. The town exhales. Around you stands a society proud of its principles and deeply committed to violating them. And within it live black Americans whose days are constrained by force, yet whose presence, labour, memory, and persistence are everywhere, holding up a world that refuses to admit how much it owes them. Long before the sun shows itself, you are awake. Not because morning feels fresh or hopeful, not because birdsong has gently lifted you from sleep. You wake because somebody else's household, field, stable, or shop is already waiting to be fed by your effort. The dark has not lifted yet. The air is cold against your face, or damp, or thick with the kind of warmth that clings even before dawn. Somewhere nearby, wood settles with a faint pop in the hearth. A rooster sounds off too early, like a rude little trumpet with feathers. Then another answers. Sleep thins and disappears. You open your eyes in a world that does not ask what you need. The sleeping place is simple, sometimes painfully so. It may be a loft, a corner near the kitchen, a pallet on rough boards, a cramped room behind a main chamber, or a cabin with walls that let the wind whisper through every crack. You feel straw under cloth, hardwood under straw, cold air around your ankle. The blanket, if there is one worth naming, smells faintly of smoke and old sweat. A child shifts nearby, someone coughs, somebody mutters a prayer so softly it almost blends into breathing. Then the day begins pressing down. In many places, the first task comes before real light. Fire must be built up, water must be fetched, animals must be checked, fed, milked, or driven. Floors must be swept, pots must be lifted, dough must be worked, ash must be carried out. On a plantation, overseers or drivers expect movement early, because every useful minute belongs to the people claiming power. In a townhouse, the family upstairs may still be asleep while the whole machinery of their comfort is already grinding into motion below. You can smell morning before you can see it clearly. Damp earth, cinders revived into flame, wet wool, livestock, salt air in a port, mud, kettles warming, old straw, human breath in close quarters, in wealthier houses. There may be the richer smell of bread beginning to bake or meat already turning on a spit for those who will later discuss manners over breakfast. Meanwhile, the people making that breakfast are moving through half-light with stiff hands and heavy eyelids. There is very little privacy in waking. That matters more than people sometimes realize. Modern life lets you disappear into a bathroom mirror, wander toward a kettle, stare blankly at nothing, and be left alone with your miserable thoughts for a few minutes. In 1770, especially for black Americans held in slavery, the morning is rarely yours in any meaningful sense. Eyes are nearby, orders are nearby, the possibility of correction is nearby. Even your slowness can be noticed, interpreted, punished, mocked, or remembered. So the body learns to rise fast. This is one of the quiet brutalities of the period, not always the spectacular cruelty people imagine first, though that exists too. It is the daily theft of the small human cushion between sleeping and serving. You are expected to pass almost immediately from vulnerable stillness into useful motion. No gentle stretching, no dreamy pause at a window, no precious little routine with a ceramic mug and a philosophical sigh, just cold floorboards and obligation. You step outside carrying a pail. The sky is not black now, but a deep grey blue, the kind that makes every fence and tree look softened at the edges. Grass may be silvered with dew in colder places. The water skin in the bucket bites your fingers. In southern lowlands, morning can arrive wrapped in mist, warm and wet against the skin, with insects already beginning their small campaigns of annoyance. The world is beautiful in spite of itself. That is often how history behaves. Lovely sky. Terrible society. Around you, other people are waking too. Some are black and enslaved, already moving in practice patterns. Some are free black labourers beginning a different sort of long day. Some are white labourers, apprentices, servants, wives, children, masters, mistresses. The colony wakes in layers, yet one layer supports the rest with exhausting reliability. That layer is black labour, summoned early and assumed to be endlessly available. In an urban household, the first sounds inside may be the scrape of iron against brick, the splash of water into basins, the rustle of skirts, the thud of a bucket set down too hard because wrists are still half asleep. In a rural setting, morning may begin with distant voices crossing a yard, the shuffle of feet over packed dirt, the snort of horses, the low complaint of cattle, the squeal of a cartwheel that has needed grease for weeks. Sound travels differently before sunrise. It feels larger, sharper, more intimate. And it all says the same thing: time to work. For enslaved women in domestic settings, the morning can be especially relentless. They may need to light fires in several rooms, prepare food, wash utensils left from the previous night, tend to children, help dress mistresses, empty chamber pots, or begin laundry before the household has even fully stirred. Their own hunger, fatigue, soreness, or illness rarely earns serious attention. A mistress might complain of poor tea while a woman beside her has already been awake for hours. One life is treated as delicate, the other as infrastructure. For enslaved men in towns, a sunrise might bring carting, chopping, hauling, stable work, craft labour, or errands across busy streets, on plantations. It may mean moving toward tobacco rows, rice fields, indigo works, livestock enclosures, or repair tasks that multiply faster than they can be finished. Children also work, not always in the same manner as adults, but far more than any child should. Carrying, fetching, scaring birds from crops, minding younger children, cleaning, learning early that usefulness is demanded before innocence has even had a chance to stretch. That early start is not simply about productivity. It is also about discipline. Rising at command teaches submission through repetition. Day after day, year after year, the lesson is pressed into the muscles. Your time is not your own. Your fatigue is irrelevant. Your wishes do not matter. A person can be ruled by dramatic force, yes, but also by routine so constant it tries to feel natural. That is one of slavery's ugliest tricks. It takes the abnormal and rehearses it until others call it ordinary. Yet mourning also reveals character in small flashes. Someone passes half a crust to another person without a word. A woman steadies a sleepy child by pressing a warm palm against the back of the neck. A man glances toward the house before whispering a quick joke that earns the faintest snort of laughter. Humour survives in the narrowest spaces. It tends to be dry, sly, and precise. No surprise there. People living under power often become excellent judges of absurdity. They are surrounded by it. Imagine hearing a white colonist complain at breakfast that his eggs are late while the person serving them rose in darkness, hauled water, lit fires, and cooked over smoke before he even opened his eyes. If irony could bake, colonial America would have smelled fantastic. The food available in the morning varies sharply. Some enslaved people may receive cornmeal, coarse bread, porridge, leftovers, or small portions eaten quickly between duties. Sometimes the quality is poor, the amount inadequate, the timing uncertain. In some households, the enslaved must prepare generous breakfasts they barely taste themselves. Bacon hisses, bread warms, coffee or tea is poured. The room fills with rich smells. Yet hunger remains right there, standing politely near the table and pretending not to notice. Nutrition is one of those plain facts that shapes everything. A body driven hard on limited food feels mourning differently. Weakness arrives sooner, irritation grows quicker, illness lingers longer, recovery shortens. Historians know that enslaved diets differed by region and circumstance, but records often tell more about what owners intended to provide than what people consistently received. There is still uncertainty in the details. Plantation accounts and household inventories can look neat on paper, while real hunger moves through human bodies in much messier ways. As light spreads, the hierarchy becomes visible. In a grander house, polished objects begin to glow. Pewter, brass, window glass, clean linen. The family appears in stages, hair arranged, clothing adjusted, voices gaining confidence with each cup. Their mourning happens because another morning was already consumed beneath it. In a field setting, the visibility of power is less polished but no less sharp. Horses, whips, commands, schedules, watchfulness. Distance does not soften control, it simply stretches it across open land. Some mornings begin with fear more than labour, a missing tool, a delayed task, a child crying too long, a broken dish, an animal not properly secured, a body that simply cannot move at the pace demanded. Punishment can enter the day before the sun clears the horizon. You feel how exhausting that is, not only physically but mentally. To wake and immediately scan for danger, to measure tone of voice, to read footsteps, to tell from the speed of a door opening whether this morning will pass quietly or turn hard. That skill of reading atmosphere becomes essential. People notice everything. A mistress speaking through tight teeth, a master already irritated by business losses, an overseer carrying tension in his shoulders, a child in the main house sick and likely to make everyone else's day worse, weather shifting toward rain, a cart arriving unexpectedly, small signs, useful signs. Survival often depends on gathering them faster than anyone realizes. In some communities, dawn also brings a brief kind of collective presence. You walk alongside others to fields or yards. You exchange looks that say more than speech can safely hold. Perhaps a phrase passes between you. Perhaps a line of a song. Perhaps only the rhythm of footsteps keeping company for a minute. These moments are easily missed in records, because ledgers love quantities and law books love categories, but shared mornings matter. Repeated contact, however limited, helps people build trust, spread news, and preserve a sense that they belong to one another, not only to the system crushing them. A curious little detail appears in several kinds of evidence from the period. Enslavers often depended on the internal knowledge of the very people they controlled to make mornings run efficiently. Who knows which horse kicks? Who knows which child will settle if given that cup, not the other one? Who knows the exact amount of heat a certain bread needs? Who knows where the leaks start after rain? Often it is the enslaved person, not the person claiming authority, who holds the practical intelligence of the household or farm. Power and competence do not always live in the same body. Colonial society likes to pretend otherwise. Bless its confused little heart. The sky's brighter now, streaked pale over roofs or tree lines. Smoke rises in thin threads. Wheels begin rolling on roads. In cities, bells may ring the hour. Sailors call to each other near wharves. Shop shutters creak open. In the countryside, the work line forms, and fields begin swallowing bodies into distance. Morning is no longer private at all. It has become public labour. For free black Americans, dawn can feel different in law, but not always in comfort. A free man heading to skilled work still moves through a colony ready to question his status. A free woman beginning her day may labour for wages, manage a household, or trade goods, but she does so under suspicion, legal limits, and the constant possibility of insult or obstruction. Freedom exists on paper more securely than it does in the street. The difference between being free and being treated as fully safe is painfully large. And there is another layer here. Memory. A person waking in 1770 may carry stories from African-born parents or grandparents about different mornings elsewhere. Different light, different duties, different foods, different prayers spoken at first light. Some customs survive in fragments, reshaped by the colonies but not erased. A gesture, a way of preparing grain, a rhythm hummed under the breath. Scholars continue debating how directly certain practices can be linked to specific African regions, because the evidence is scattered and filtered through hostile records. Still, cultural endurance is not a fantasy. It is one of the clearest facts in the whole Atlantic world. You feel that endurance most strongly not in speeches, but in habits. The care used to wrap a child, the choice to wash and mend clothing despite exhaustion, the insistence on seasoning food well when ingredients allow, the effort to keep the body presentable. These are not trivial things. They are declarations, however quiet. I am still a person. I still know how to order life. I still carry standards that did not begin with you. The morning continues gathering speed. Heat rises from the hearth. Water slops against bucket sides. A broom rasps over boards. A horse stamps. Someone calls for more wood. Someone else answers too quickly because slowness invites trouble. Smoke catches in your throat. Your hands are busy. Your shoulders already ache. The day has barely begun, and that is the point you cannot miss. For many black Americans in 1770, sunrise is not promise. It is command. It arrives not as a fresh page but as a reopened account, with labour due immediately and rest already treated as a kind of theft. Each morning begins with the same hard bargain forced upon the body. Wake quickly, move quickly, endure quietly. Carry the colony on your back before the colony has even finished yawning. The sun lifts at last, thin and pale or bright and hot, depending on where you stand. It touches roofs, fences, muddy roads, river water, faces, tools, smoke. The world looks almost gentle for one brief moment, then orders come again, and the full machinery of the day turns forward, leaving no space between being awake and being used. By the time the sun has properly climbed, you begin to understand the true size of the work. It is everywhere, not simply in the fields, where most people expect to find it, but in kitchens, bakehouses, docks, stables, shops, smokehouses, laundry yards, workshops, alleyways, gardens, attics, cellars, and muddy roads between them. The colony runs on black labour so completely that the place would feel eerily still without it. No carts creaking toward market, no barrels rolled into storage, no breakfast carried to polished tables, no tobacco packed, no rice cleaned, no horse rubbed down after travel, no laundry boiled and beaten into something a wealthy family can call respectable. The whole machine would shudder and stall. You walk first toward open land, where work takes one shape. In tobacco country, the air already carries the green, thick smell of plants and damp soil warming under the sun. Leaves brush against your arms. Dirt presses into the lines of your palms. Your back bends and straightens, until the motion seems less like a choice than a condition of being alive. Tobacco is fussy work. It asks for constant attention, not a single dramatic burst of effort, hoeing, planting, topping, cutting, hanging, curing, packing. Every stage wants hands, careful hands, fast hands, tired hands. The plant never says thank you, and neither do the men who profit from it. In the Carolina Low Country, labour can feel different but no less consuming. Rice fields shimmer under a hard light, with standing water reflecting the sky in a way that might look beautiful from a distance. Up close, it is muddy, wet, hot, and full of insects with dreadful ambition. Your feet sink, your clothing clings. Mosquitoes whine at your ears. The smell is part marsh, part rot, part growing life. Rice cultivation demands skill, timing, and knowledge of water control that many enslaved Africans and their descendants bring with them into this brutal system. Historians have long argued over exactly how much specific African expertise shaped the rise of rice production in South Carolina and Georgia. The debate continues in the details, but no serious reading of the period can ignore the deep agricultural knowledge enslaved workers carried into the Low Country. On smaller farms, the work refuses to stay in one lane. You may start by tending crops, then be sent to mend a fence, carry feed, clear brush, chop wood, or help repair a wagon. The day fragments into 100 demands. There is no neat job description. Colonial life loves improvisation when someone else is doing the improvising for free. And then there are towns. You move from open land into a busy port, where labour has a different rhythm, sharper and more public. The streets smell of horse dung, fish, tar, wet rope, and spilled molasses turning sticky in the heat. Dock workers shout to each other over the slap of water and the hollow thump of cargo hitting wood. Ships arrive loaded with sugar, rum, textiles, iron, salt, and news from every corner of the Atlantic world. Ships also leave carrying the wealth wrung from enslaved bodies. In cities like Charleston, Newport, New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, black labour helps move the empire one crate at a time. At the waterfront, the work is heavy and exacting. Barrels must be lifted without splitting, rope must be coiled, cargo must be sorted and counted. The boards underfoot can be slick. The smell of the harbour gets into everything. Salt dries on your skin. Tar sticks to your fingers. A gull screams overhead as if personally offended by commerce. Fair enough. Some black men in port towns work as sailors, boatmen, or pilots. And maritime labour can offer wider movement than plantation work. That does not make it easy. It means wind, cold, storms, dangerous loads, harsh discipline, and the constant threat of being cheated, seized, or forced into another condition entirely. Yet the waterfront can also spread information. Sailors hear things, boatmen carry talk. News travels across water faster than people with power would always prefer. In urban households, the labour is less visible to strangers and no less endless. You step through a service door and feel the temperature change at once. Kitchen heat folds around you. Bread crusts darken in ovens. Pots simmer. Knives knock against wooden boards. A woman turns a spit and wipes her face with the back of her wrist, then reaches for another task before the first has fully ended. Domestic labour is often spoken of as if it were lighter because it happens indoors. That idea is nonsense. Dressed nicely. Housework in 1770 means lifting, scrubbing, hauling, boiling, kneading, chopping, carrying, cleaning, dressing, nursing, and standing for long hours on unforgiving floors. It is physical, repetitive, skilled, and often performed under intimate observation. The clothes alone create labour. Shirts must be washed and wrung, stockings mended, stays laced, shoes brushed, linen aired, stains fought with patience and elbow strength. White colonists enjoy presenting cleanliness as a sign of moral virtue, which is especially rich when someone else is exhausting herself to produce it. You enter a workshop next, where labour takes yet another form. Black Americans in 1770 are not only field hands and domestic servants. Many are skilled artisans, carpenters, blacksmiths, coopers, brickmakers, sawyers, sailmakers, cooks with refined practical knowledge, drivers with expertise in roots and animals, men and women whose mastery supports the economy in plain sight. In some places, enslaved artisans are hired out by their owners, who collect the wages or a large share of them. This arrangement can allow a little movement, sometimes a little bargaining room, sometimes rare chances to keep small earnings, but it remains built on ownership. Skill raises value in the market, not dignity in law. You hear a hammering against iron, bright and sharp, sparks jump. The shop smells of hot metal and charcoal and sweat. Every strike lands with intention. That sound is the colony shaping itself. One hinge, nail, chain, and tool at a time. Much of the built environment around you depends on black craftsmanship, even if records often credit the enslaver, the contractor, or the purchaser, rather than the person who actually made the thing. The hand disappears from the story while its work remains everywhere. A curious detail from the period slips in here. Some enslaved artisans became so essential that their owners depended on them in almost embarrassing ways. A man who could repair a wagon wheel, shoe a horse, mend a hinge, and improvise a fix for a broken plough might be treated like both a servant and an emergency department. Every time something snapped, leaked, split, or failed, people suddenly remembered his importance. Colonial society was full of men loudly praising independence while being unable to function without the person they claimed to own. History can be painfully absurd. For black women, labour also extends into areas records often flatten or ignore. Food processing, dairying, poultry care, brewing, gardening, spinning, sewing, childcare, and nursing all demand judgment, memory, and physical endurance. A woman might carry water, prepare meals, assist in a birth, wash bedding, calm a frightened child, and still be expected to return to laundry before the day is out. There is no respected boundary around her exhaustion. Her work simply keeps expanding until night. Children are drawn into this world early. A small boy may scare birds from crops, carry messages, fetch tools, or watch animals. A girl may mind infants, peel vegetables, sweep, spin, or bring water to older workers. The tasks are smaller only in comparison to adult burdens. Childhood does not vanish completely, but it is pressed thin. Play survives in scraps. So does curiosity, yet usefulness arrives first, and too soon. There is also the labour of being watchful. This kind of work is not entered in a ledger, but it drains the mind all the same. You must measure tone, judge mood, anticipate demands, remember schedules, hide fatigue, and adjust your face. The wrong glance may be read as insolence, the wrong pace as laziness, the wrong answer as defiance. This constant internal calculation sits under physical work like a second weight. Your hands labour, your nerves labour too, at noon. Perhaps there is a brief pause, or perhaps not. In some places, food is taken quickly in the field or yard. Cornmeal mush, bread, salted meat if available, a few vegetables, water that may be warm by the time it reaches you. In a busy kitchen, you may eat standing up between tasks, barely tasting the food before a voice calls you elsewhere. Hunger never gets a dignified audience. It is expected to wait its turn. The afternoon heat settles heavily. Flies gather, shirts cling to the body, smoke from cook fires hangs low in still air. In northern towns, summer can turn streets sour with refuse and stable waste. In the south, humidity can make every movement feel wrapped in wet cloth. You feel salt dry on your skin. You feel dust gathering at the ankles. You feel how the body becomes both instrument and target, pushed to produce until weakness shows. And still, the colony wants more. That is the phrase under everything. More cleared land, more packed tobacco, more polished silver, more loaded cargo, more spun thread, more fed animals, more cleaned rooms, more harvested grain, more repaired tools, more. The appetite of the system is astonishing. It does not merely ask for labour, it normalises extraction until rest appears suspicious. You notice, too, how white colonists often divide the work into categories of value that flatter themselves. The merchant says trade created wealth. The planter says land created wealth. The mistress says management created order. The politician says principles created nation. All charming theories. Meanwhile, someone black is carrying the wood, stirring the kettle, shaping the barrel, weeding the field, and pulling the whole claim of civilization behind them like a cart with a broken wheel. Labour does not only create goods, it creates status for others. The polished table, the clean shirt, the full pantry, the profitable voyage, the orderly stable, the productive field, the impressive house, all of it becomes evidence of white success. Yet that success is often built from work done by people denied control over their own bodies and time. This is one of the central facts of 1770. Black labour is not marginal to colonial prosperity, it is structural. Remove it, and much of the economy caves inward. Even in places where slavery is smaller in scale, it still matters deeply. Northern merchants profit from Caribbean trade tied to plantation slavery. Urban families use enslaved domestic labour to display gentility. Craftsmen and business owners hire or purchase black labour to strengthen their shops. Slavery is not only a southern plantation story, it is braided into the broader Atlantic economy, and ordinary comforts in one region can rest on forced work in another. Late in the day, the sounds change. Tools strike more slowly, voices roughen with fatigue, carts head back from market, animals are brought in kitchens. Evening preparation begins while daylight still lingers, in fields. The last tasks stretch longer than the body wants to allow. That extra half hour matters to the owner, and costs the worker far more than he admits. A scholar might call this labour regime diversified, regionally adaptive, and embedded in both local and transatlantic systems. All true, but standing here, in the thick of it, you feel the simpler truth first. It is exhausting, bone deep, repetitive, skilled, underpraised, coerced, essential. Once you see it clearly, you cannot stop seeing it, and you also begin to notice the invisible traces workers leave on the world around them. The straightness of a repaired gate, the flavour in a pot, the clean fold of linen, the secure knot in a cargo rope, the even rows in a field, the smooth hinge on a door, the polished harness, the carefully banked fire ready for morning. Much of colonial life rests on this accumulated intelligence of the hand. The colony depends on people it refuses to honour. There is uncertainty in the record, of course. Historians can estimate occupations, labour patterns, and economic importance from censuses, runaway advertisements, account books, probate inventories, and correspondence. But lived experience is harder to capture. We know a great deal about what people were made to do. We know less about what each task felt like in the private mind, how time stretched on a humid afternoon, how resentment mixed with pride in skilled work, how the body negotiated pain without permission to stop. The archive records output better than sensation. Still, sensation remains the nearest truth, so you stay in the day a little longer and listen. A cooper taps a hoop into place. A child runs with a bundle nearly as large as the chest carrying it. Water sloshes from a pail. Someone coughs in the smoke of a cook fire. A horse shakes its harness. The harbour answers with rope against mast and the cry of birds over salt water. Everything is in motion because black Americans keep it in motion. This is what work means here. Not a shift. Not a profession freely chosen. Not a tidy little identity wrapped in purpose and ambition. It is the unending conversion of human effort into someone else's comfort, profit, and prestige. The colony calls this ordinary life. You hear the lie in every sound. Without black labour, the fields would thin, the kitchens cool, the ships wait, the houses sag, and the grand talk of prosperity would lose its confident voice. By evening your hands ache, your shoulders burn, your feet feel made of stone, and the day has still managed to leave pieces of itself unfinished. There will always be unfinished pieces. That, too, serves the system. If labour is endless, then rest can always be delayed. And so the sun begins to lower over roofs, water, or fields, gilding the edges of a world that has taken far too much from the people who hold it together. The light softens. The tasks do not. The colony remains hungry, and black labour remains the meal placed before it, day after day, with no promise that tomorrow will ask for anything less. By the time you begin to see how labour fills the colony, another truth comes quietly into view. The labour is not the only thing being counted. People are being counted too, not as souls, not as neighbours, not as lives unfolding with their own wishes, talents, tempers, and griefs. They are counted in ledgers, listed in inventories, entered into wills, taxed, insured, mortgaged, rented, and appraised. Ink dries over names, ages, bodies, and supposed qualities, and that ink claims to turn a person into property. It is one of the bleakest tricks in the colonial world. Write down a price, and call the theft respectable. You step into a counting room where the air smells of paper, wax, dust, and old wood. A clerk bends over a desk under the weak light of a window. His pen scratches steadily across a page. The figures look neat. The columns are tidy. A horse, 2 silver spoons, 1 wagon, 4 chairs, 1 enslaved man, 1 enslaved woman and child. The calmness of the handwriting makes the content feel worse. Somehow, the violence is hidden behind good penmanship. This is how ownership often appears in the records of 1770. Quiet, methodical, administrative. A plantation inventory might place a human being between livestock and furniture, as though the difference were merely decorative. A will might divide people among heirs with the same tone used to assign linen or land. A merchant's account book may note payment for an enslaved worker hired out to another employer, reducing months of human effort to a line item, even when people are named. The naming is often partial and cold, a first name only, an age guessed rather than known. A short remark about skill, temperament, or health, as if describing a mule with strong legs and an unfortunate tendency to bite. The language itself deserves suspicion. Owners say servant when they mean enslaved. They say likely, healthy, handy, breeding, obedient, troublesome, stout, prime. The words are meant to turn flesh into a commercial category. They pretend to be practical. They are actually a moral disaster in tidy handwriting. When a person is enslaved in colonial America, ownership does not just mean forced labour. It means that someone else claims a legal right to the body, the movement, the wages, the future children, and the value that can be extracted through sale. In most colonies, the condition follows the mother. That rule is especially cruel in its efficiency. It allows slavery to reproduce itself, folding birth into the market with the calm confidence of people who have trained themselves not to hear the horror in what they are doing. You feel this most sharply at an auction. The place may be a dockside yard, a town square, a merchant's lot, or a plantation sale. The smells are immediate: mud, leather, sweat, horse breath, cheap liquor on somebody's coat. The crowd shifts and murmurs. Boots scrape the ground. A man clears his throat and raises his voice, and suddenly the body in front of him is no longer treated as a person standing in public. It becomes an object under inspection. Hands may be examined, teeth checked, muscles judged, scars noticed, age guessed. A buyer asks questions in the same practical tone he might use for a cart horse, perhaps with even less warmth. Can he lift? Can she cook? Has she borne children? Does the child look sturdy? Is the man a cooper, a carpenter, a field hand? Does he speak English well? Has she been troublesome? Such questions are not unusual. That is what makes them so chilling. They sit easily in the mouths of people who go home afterward and discuss virtue over supper. Auctions do not always look dramatic in the surviving record. Sometimes they appear only as notices, advertisements, receipts, or legal transfers. Yet behind each dry line sits a scene of uncertainty, fear, and exposure. Historians can reconstruct some aspects of these sales, but not always the exact sounds, the exact looks, the exact private terror in a person's mind when strangers assess whether to buy him, buy her, separate a household, or send a life into an unknown region. Scholars still debate how often family groups were deliberately marketed together in particular places and periods, because the records are uneven and sometimes deceptive. Sellers had reasons to present themselves as humane even when profit remained the true guide. The market does not only work through outright sale, it also works through hiring out. That phrase sounds mild. It is not. Hiring out means that an owner temporarily rents an enslaved person's labour to someone else and collects the payment. In towns especially, this can be common. An enslaved carpenter may be sent to a building site. A washerwoman may be hired into another household. A dock worker may labour for a merchant who does not own him permanently, but profits from the arrangement for a season or a day. Sometimes the enslaved person handles wages directly and returns an agreed portion to the owner. Sometimes the owner collects everything. Sometimes a sliver is left in the worker's hands. That small difference can matter, but it does not alter the underlying fact. The labour belongs first to the owner because the law says the person does. Hiring out creates a strange social geography. You may spend your days moving through the city with more apparent freedom than someone confined to one household. Yet every step is still governed by someone else's claim. A pass may be required. A curfew may wait at night. A missed payment can lead to punishment. Extra movement can widen the mind and widen the network of contacts, but it also widens opportunity for surveillance. The system manages to be flexible and cruel at once. It adapts when money can be made, and money can nearly always be made. You pass a merchant who is calculating not only what a worker produces, but what that worker could fetch if sold elsewhere. This is one of the ugliest habits of slave societies. A person is forced to live under a constant second shadow. The possibility that today's owner might decide tomorrow's cash matters more than yesterday's familiarity. A skilled artisan can be praised in the morning and sold in the afternoon. A woman trusted with a household key can still be listed as transferable property. A child can become an asset before fully understanding the word. In plantation regions, enslaved people are often bound up in credit itself. Landowners borrow against them. Estates are valued through them. Debts are settled by transferring them. Human beings become collateral in a financial order that congratulates itself on sophistication. Colonial bookkeeping really can make barbarism look frightfully organised. There is a bitter little absurdity here. White colonists who would consider a broken chair a regrettable inconvenience can calmly discuss the sale of a teenager as a financial adjustment. They may even flatter themselves for being reasonable businessmen. Nothing sharpens the appetite for profit quite like deciding other people are things. Yet even inside this brutal logic, the colony cannot fully erase the fact that the people being bought, sold, or hired out are thinking, judging, remembering human beings. An enslaved man may notice the quality of a prospective buyer's boots and in for wealth or vanity. A woman may watch the face of another enslaved person already in that household, searching for a clue about what kind of place it is. A child may sense danger in tone before understanding the words. People under sale are not blank. They are reading the room for survival. You move into a domestic interior where ownership feels quieter and more intimate. Here the violence wears softer shoes. An enslaved girl helps dress the woman who claims to own her. An enslaved man waits at table while guests compliment the household's elegance. A child is sent with a message across town and praised for being quick. The routine looks polished, yet ownership still lies underneath every motion. The person carrying the tray cannot choose to resign. The person brushing the coat cannot decide to leave for a better employer. The child praised for obedience is being trained for profitable usefulness. That intimacy makes household slavery especially unsettling. People live close enough to know one another's habits, illnesses, tempers, and private embarrassments. An owner may know exactly how someone laughs, how someone limps when tired, what food causes stomach pain, what tone of voice makes a child flinch, and still call that knowledge affection while retaining the legal power to sell. It is a warped kind of familiarity, all the more dangerous because it can mimic care. Some owners do claim to feel a responsibility for those they enslave. Colonial letters and diaries occasionally present such sentiments, wrapped in the language of paternalism or Christian duty. They speak of benevolence, protection, guidance, household harmony. You read these claims and feel a familiar historical itch. Ah, yes. The timeless tradition of people congratulating themselves for being kind while profiting from domination. Very moving. Extremely convenient. The economic side of ownership also varies by region. In the Chesapeake, tobacco wealth has long depended on enslaved labour, and by 1770 many plantations include multiple generations of enslaved families. In the lower South, rice and indigo production create different labour systems and different demands, often shaped by large-scale agriculture and seasonal cycles. In northern colonies, enslaved people are more likely to be held in smaller numbers, often one or two in a household, though cities like New York and ports tied to Atlantic trade can have substantial enslaved populations. The scale changes. The legal and moral injury remains. You glance at an estate inventory after a death. These documents can be painfully revealing. The deceased's belongings are listed for valuation and distribution. Beds, cups, cows, tools, books, enslaved people. The placement is almost always a shock, even when you expect it. On paper, the person who cooked the meals, buried the waste, soothed the babies, built the fence, drove the cart, and milked the cows becomes one more estate asset. Probate can be one of the clearest windows into the ordinary structure of slavery, precisely because it is so cold. Death strips away performance and leaves accounting behind. Then there are advertisements for sale and for capture. A newspaper notice may describe an enslaved person who has run away, listing clothing, complexion, manner of speech, marks on the skin, possible destination, and reward amount. Another notice offers a man for sale, praising his trade skill and bodily strength. This same printing press that carries political outrage about liberty may carry commercial language about black bodies on the next page. Colonial irony is not subtle. It just keeps showing up, powdered and self-impressed. Those advertisements also reveal something else. People resist commodification by moving, escaping, hiding, lying, negotiating, forging connections, and seizing any chance to step outside ownership. The market wants stillness. Human beings keep producing motion. Even when the section of a newspaper tries to pin someone down in descriptive phrases, the very fact of a runaway notice proves that person acted against the claim of property. Still, the danger is real. Being sold south can mean harsher labour. Being transferred from town to countryside can sever a network of contacts. Being hired into an unfamiliar household can expose a person to new abuse. Sale is not merely a change of workplace. It can reorder the entire horizon of a life within a single afternoon. Touch matters here too. Rough cloth at the sleeve while someone turns an arm for inspection. The pressure of fingers on a jawline to check teeth. The feel of shoes too thin for a muddy yard. The stiffness of a back forced to stand still while strangers discuss price. Smell matters, wet wool, cheap tobacco, ink, rain on dirt, the faint sweetness of molasses from a nearby cask. Ownership enters the senses as much as the law. It is handled, smelled, heard, and endured, and yet the law remains central. Colonial statutes in many places define enslaved people as property in ways that shape inheritance, punishment, manumission, and commerce. Different colonies vary in detail, but the overall effect is clear. The legal system provides a framework through which sale and hire can happen with confidence. Courts record transfers, officials enforce claims, buyers trust the market because the state helps make people buyable. There is nothing accidental about it. That is why the counting room matters as much as the auction yard. One makes the violence visible, the other makes it routine. Numbers, receipts, and inventories teach society to treat theft as administration. They allow distance. They make it possible for a man to say he is not cruel, merely practical. Perhaps the most dangerous phrase in any oppressive system is not "I hate you." It is "this is simply how business works." You remain there, in that paper-scented room, listening to the pen move, scratch, pause, scratch again. A small sound, barely anything, yet each mark helps maintain a world in which human beings can be transferred like tools. Outside, carts rattle past, cooks stir kettles, craftsmen strike iron, children carry pails. Life continues because the system depends on continuation. Inside, the clerk sands the page, blows gently across it, and closes the ledger. The book looks harmless on the shelf. That is part of the problem. You do not need chains clanking in the street to know the law is present. You feel it in smaller things first, in the hesitation before crossing a threshold, in the pass folded carefully into a pocket or tucked into a sleeve, in the glance toward a constable, in the way a white stranger can ask a question that is not really a question at all. The law in 1770 is not merely a book in a courthouse. It is a net thrown across daily life, with different knots tied in different colonies, always tugging black Americans back toward control. You begin in a courthouse yard where the building itself tries to look calm and respectable. Brick walls, tall windows, steps worn by many shoes, a bell somewhere nearby. Men gather in coats and stockings, talking in the tone people use when they think order belongs naturally to them. Paper passes from hand to hand. Ink dries on decisions. Horses stamp at hitching posts. The air smells of dust, leather, damp wool, and the faint sourness of crowded bodies waiting too long in one place. Inside, the room is quieter than an auction yard and somehow just as cold. Benches creak. A clerk bends over his papers. Voices rise only when needed. Here the colony performs its favourite little fantasy, that power becomes virtue the moment it is arranged into procedure. Very elegant, very polished, very capable of ruining a life before noon. The law governing black Americans in colonial British America is not identical everywhere. Virginia does not match Massachusetts exactly. South Carolina differs from Pennsylvania. New York has its own patterns. Local custom matters. Enforcement varies. And some northern colonies show more openings for manumission or legal petition than plantation centres in the South. Yet, through all these variations, one broad reality remains constant. The legal order is structured to keep black people vulnerable, restricted, and available for white control. For enslaved people, the most basic legal fact is brutal and simple. The law does not begin from the idea that you own yourself. It begins from the claim that someone else does. That principle shapes movement, marriage, labour, punishment, testimony, inheritance, and the fate of children. Every other detail grows out of that poisoned root. You step back outside and walk along a road where movement itself becomes a legal question. In many places, enslaved people are required to carry written permission to travel away from the household, plantation, or work site. A pass may state where a person is going, why, and for how long. Without it, any white man who chooses to involve himself may stop, question, detain, beat or drag the traveller before an authority. The paper is fragile. The danger is not. Think about what that does to the body. Every journey becomes a performance. You must move with enough confidence not to invite suspicion, but not so much confidence that it is mistaken for independence. You must remember names, destinations, errands, times. You must be ready for interruption. Freedom of movement, which sounds so abstract when politicians discuss rights, becomes painfully concrete when one wrong answer on a roadside can turn into punishment. Night tightens the law further. Curfews exist in various places. Patrols watch roads and settlements. Groups of black people gathering after dark can provoke anxiety and intervention from whites convinced that every conversation beyond their hearing must be dangerous. Sometimes they are right to be uneasy, though not for the reasons they imagine. A society built on coercion eventually becomes frightened of every unmonitored breath. The patrol system is especially important in plantation regions. Armed white men ride, inspect, question, and search. They look for runaways, weapons, unauthorized gatherings, signs of revolt, signs of planning, signs of ordinary humanity occurring too independently for their taste. Hooves on a night road can send a chill through an entire settlement. You hear the tack creak. You hear voices carrying over the dark. You hear how law becomes sound before it becomes text. Punishment is another place where the law reveals its true purpose. Colonial statutes often prescribe whipping, branding, confinement, mutilation in earlier periods, fines against owners, or other penalties for acts committed by enslaved people. By 1770, some of the harshest penalties vary by colony and circumstance, but physical punishment remains central. Enslavers do not always need a court to inflict it. Household and plantation discipline often happens privately, backed by law rather than supervised by it. The state does not need to swing every blow. It simply needs to make clear whose blows count as authorized. For free black Americans, the law can look different but still feel like a locked door. A free person may own property in some places, make contracts, worship publicly, work for wages, sue in limited circumstances, or petition authorities. Yet freedom is fragile, conditional, and deeply unequal. A free black man walking in the wrong district at the wrong hour can still be challenged. A free black woman's word may carry less legal weight than that of a white person accusing her. Local rules may require registration, proof of manumission, tax payments, or certificates that must be produced on demand. The difference between freedom in theory and safety in practice remains painfully wide. The matter of testimony shows this clearly. In several colonies, black people face serious restrictions on testifying against whites in court, especially in criminal cases. That means a crime can happen in front of your eyes, and the legal system may still refuse to hear you fully if the accused is white. Imagine the taste of that knowledge. Dry in the mouth, bitter at the back of the tongue. Justice is announced from the bench, but whole categories of people are kept at a distance from it. You pause near a notice board where public announcements curl at the edges in damp air. Some concern debt, some concern land, some concern fugitives, some concern regulations for markets, roads, or elections. The state is always speaking in paper. Yet only some people are addressed as full participants. Black Americans appear in this paper world largely as subjects of control. Suspected bodies, taxable labour, disputed property, or exceptional petitioners asking permission for something white colonists treat as ordinary. Marriage is a painful example. Enslaved marriages generally lack the full legal standing granted to white unions. Couples may form deep, lasting bonds, recognized by community and sometimes by religious ceremony. But the law of slavery can override those ties whenever sale, inheritance, or owner convenience demands it. A husband and wife can be separated because legal ownership outranks emotional fact. The colony understands perfectly well that these are human bonds. It simply chooses profit and power over them. Children live under the law's shadow too. Since status usually follows the mother, the birth of a child to an enslaved woman expands an owner's property. There it is again, that hideous neatness. A baby enters the world, breathing softly, skin warm, fingers curling, and the legal system is already prepared to sort that life into bondage. You do not need a dramatic scene to feel the cruelty. The cruelty is embedded in the rule itself. There are rare legal openings. Some enslaved people sue for freedom, often based on technicalities, dissent, baptism claims in earlier eras, residence histories, broken promises, or wrongful enslavement. Free black petitioners sometimes appeal for rights, relief, or protection. Manumission happens, though unevenly and often with conditions. In parts of the North, anti-slavery sentiment grows in certain religious circles, especially among Quakers. Yet these openings are narrow and uncertain. A person entering the legal system does not step onto neutral ground. The floor is slanted from the start. Historians still argue over how much ordinary black people trusted courts as a possible tool, because surviving petitions show both remarkable legal knowledge and the obvious fact that only a fraction of attempts were recorded or preserved. Some people must have seen the law as a weapon only. Others saw tiny spaces where that weapon could sometimes be turned, however briefly, against its wielder. Both readings can be true at once. You enter a meeting house where lawmakers and local elites discuss order in voices polished by habit. They worry about theft, disorder, idleness, vagrancy, unrest, discipline, race mixing, public morals, and labour supply. The list tells you almost everything. White fear and white economic interest are braided together so tightly they can hardly tell themselves apart. A law restricting assembly is about security, yes, but also about controlling labour. A law governing manumission may reflect prejudice, yes, but also anxiety about who will work and who will not. The colony's legal language often pretends to be about stability. Underneath, it is very often about extracting work while preventing autonomy. Take clothing rent, for instance. In some places and periods, lawmakers and local authorities worry over what enslaved and free black people wear, especially if dress suggests status, mobility, or refinement beyond what whites consider acceptable. A coat, a hat, a certain fabric, a shoe with a polished buckle. These can provoke suspicion because clothing speaks. It says this person is moving through the world with intention. That unsettles a society invested in visible hierarchy. Religion, too, gets tangled with law. Christian baptism does not automatically free an enslaved person by 1770, despite earlier uncertainties in some minds. Colonial law long ago closed that door. White authorities want the spiritual prestige of conversion without the legal consequence of freedom. Convenient theology is among the oldest colonial crafts. Some churches admit black worshippers while maintaining segregation, unequal discipline, or total silence on bondage. Faith may offer comfort and community, but law remains standing at the door with its arms folded. You move into a town street market where everyday regulations show their edge. Selling goods, carrying produce, hiring labour, gathering in groups, boarding in a house, all these can be shaped by local rules and white discretion. A free black vendor may find a license difficult to secure, or a customer willing until a constable becomes curious. An enslaved person sent to market may need exact permission and exact accounting on return. Any small discrepancy can become evidence of theft or deceit. The law loves bookkeeping when it suspects the powerless, and then there is violence outside formal law, the kind that works because everyone understands the law will tolerate it. A white employer cheats wages from a hired-out worker. A constable uses force before asking questions. A passerby insults or strikes a black person certain there will be no meaningful consequence. This is not lawless behaviour in the true sense. It thrives because legal inequality surrounds it like a fence. The sensory world of the law is worth noticing. The scratch of quills, the rattle of keys, the heavy smell of damp paper and sealing wax, the pinch of a wrist held too tightly by an officer, the rough grain of a courthouse bench under tired fingers, the echo of boots in a corridor where your fate is being discussed by men who have never had to prove their own right to stand there. Law is often imagined as abstract. In lived experience, it is intensely physical. A small but revealing curiosity appears in local records from the era. White officials often depend on black knowledge while denying black authority. They need black witnesses to locate roads, identify people, explain events, nurse the sick, build structures, navigate rivers, or keep households functioning. Yet when legal dignity is distributed, that same knowledge suddenly counts for less, useful in practice, diminished in principle. Colonial logic could twist itself into extraordinary shapes when racial hierarchy needed defending. Political rhetoric in 1770 makes all this sharper. White colonists increasingly complain about tyranny, corruption, standing armies, arbitrary power, and the rights of Englishmen. They fear distant authority trampling local liberty. Meanwhile, close at hand, they maintain systems that deny liberty to black people at nearly every level. The contradiction is not hidden, it is simply normalized. Men can denounce oppression at noon and enforce it by supper. For black Americans hearing this rhetoric, the effect must have ranged from bitter amusement to cautious interest to anger. Some surely recognize the opening in the language. If rights are natural, whose rights? If liberty matters, for whom? If arbitrary power is evil, what exactly is slavery? Others may have heard only more talk from men who had already proven that principles become very selective when profit is at stake. History leaves room for both responses. In northern colonies, especially, gradual shifts in opinion begin to stir. Though no sweeping legal end to slavery has yet arrived in 1770, individual manumissions occur. Anti-slavery arguments circulate in some religious and reforming circles. Court cases in the wider Atlantic world create discussion, yet these developments remain uneven, partial, and fragile. A breeze, not a storm. What the average black American feels more immediately is still the daily nearness of control, the pass, the patrol, the curfew, the court that may not hear you fully, the marriage bond the law will not honour properly, the child whose status is decided before the child can speak, the market rule that turns movement into risk, the licence withheld, the certificate demanded, the punishment threatened. The whole legal order works like a corridor with doors visible on either side, many of them locked, the rest opening only a crack. So you stand again before the courthouse as afternoon light turns warmer on the brick. Men descend the steps discussing ordinary business. A clerk closes a ledger. A constable adjusts his belt. A horse shakes its mane. Nothing looks especially dramatic. That is the genius of oppressive law when it's functioning well. It hides its cruelty inside routine. It makes domination look administrative, and exclusion look procedural, and terror look like proper order. The locked door is not always made of wood or iron. Sometimes it is made of ink, custom, and the calm voice of a man saying these are simply the rules. Love does not disappear in a slave society. It simply has to live under pressure. You feel that pressure the moment you step into a cabin at dusk, where a mother is trying to quiet a child before full dark. The room is small, the air warm with breath, smoke, and the faint smell of cornmeal cooked earlier in the day. A blanket hangs over a draughty opening. A wooden stool leans unevenly near the hearth. Someone has folded clothing with care, even though the cloth is coarse and patched. That effort matters. It tells you that family life exists here not as a sentimental idea, but as work, intention, and stubborn tenderness in a world determined to make all three difficult. A child leans against an older woman's knee. Another sits on the floor tracing a line in the dust with one finger. You hear the low murmur of adult voices, the rustle of fabric, the crackle of a fire settling into embers. Outside, the night carries insects, distant footsteps, maybe a wagon somewhere farther off. Inside, there is the soft density of people trying to stay close while they can. That last part is the wound. While black Americans in 1770 build marriages, parent children, care for elders, mourn relatives, and form kin networks as deeply as any people anywhere, they do so under a system that refuses to guarantee those bonds. Enslaved families can be recognized by community, by church, by habit, by daily devotion, by the simple fact of shared life. But they are not fully protected by law. An owner may sell a husband, transfer a wife, hire out a daughter, divide children among heirs, or move an entire household with little regard for the emotional architecture being torn apart. Family exists. Security does not. You begin with marriage, because it matters, and because the colony rarely grants it the dignity it deserves. Enslaved couples form unions in many ways, Some are blessed informally by elders. Some are acknowledged by religious ministers. Some are marked by exchange of promises in private or before trusted witnesses. Some live together when circumstances allow. Others maintain marriages across plantations, farms, or town households, seeing one another only on rare evenings, Sundays, or stolen hours after labour. Their commitment can be deep, practical, affectionate, and enduring. The law, however, generally refuses to honour it as it honours white marriage. That means one of the most intimate promises a person can make is always vulnerable to someone else's financial decision. You feel this vulnerability in the body, the pause when footsteps approach, the way a woman watches the road longer than seems casual, the careful saving of a small keepsake, the habit of speaking quickly before visiting time ends. A husband walking miles at night to see his wife is not just making a romantic gesture. He is fighting distance imposed by ownership. A wife waiting in the dark is not simply being patient. She's enduring a system built to keep affection inconvenient. Historians know that these cross-household marriages were common in many places, especially where enslaved populations were spread across separate properties. Scholars still debate how often owners encouraged such bonds for stability versus merely tolerated them when it cost little, because the motives recorded by enslavers are not always trustworthy. What is clear is that enslaved people themselves invested those bonds with enormous meaning, even when the people holding power treated them as disposable. Parenthood carries an even heavier weight. A mother wakes, works, feeds, disciplines, comforts, and watches while knowing her child is legally vulnerable from birth. In most colonies, the child's status follows the mother. So if the mother is enslaved, the child is born enslaved. It is an astonishing cruelty, both cold and efficient. The law does not wait to see what kind of person the child becomes. It does not care about promise, laughter, quickness, beauty, or need. It begins with ownership already prepared. And still, mothers parent. They soothe fevers. They wrap children against cold. They teach names, manners, warnings, songs, prayers, and survival. They improvise toys from scraps. They monitor who can be trusted. They stretch inadequate food. They correct behaviour not only for the child's character, but for the child's safety in a white world eager to punish even ordinary childishness. There is tenderness here, yes, but also strategy. A mother is not merely raising a child. She is trying to keep that child alive in a society that sees value in the body before it sees value in the soul. Fathers matter too, though the records often blur them more heavily. Some men live near their children. Some visit when labour patterns allow. Some are hired out or held elsewhere, always at risk of separation. Yet evidence from narratives, advertisements, church records, and plantation accounts makes one thing plain. Black fathers in colonial America are not absent from family feeling just because white records fail to centre them. They protect, instruct, provide what they can, model skills, offer affection, and grieve separation intensely. A system that obstructs fatherhood should not be mistaken for evidence that fatherhood did not exist. Children themselves understand more than adults sometimes admit. A small child may not grasp legal categories, but can sense instability, strange voices in the yard, a mother crying after dark, a father's visits becoming less frequent, the tense energy in a room when a sale is rumoured, the arrival of a cart at the wrong hour. Childhood in this world includes play, curiosity, and mischief, certainly. It also includes early training in uncertainty. Kinship reaches beyond the narrow household. An older woman may function as an aunt to children not biologically related to her. A neighbouring man may be called uncle out of affection and role. Grandparents, godparents, fictive kin, and community elders all help sustain family life where sale and dispersal keep threatening to break the smaller unit. This broad web of care is one of the strongest responses to instability. If one bond can be severed by force, many bonds must be built. Not because people are naive, but because they are wise. You notice how care leaves marks on a room. A gourd cup set within a child's reach. Clothing mended twice where once would have done. Herbs drying near the wall for illness. A sleeping place arranged so the youngest stays warmest. Someone has polished a spoon with sand and effort until it catches a bit of firelight. The room is not luxurious, far from it, yet it carries signs of intention everywhere. Family makes itself visible in maintenance. Meals can become one of the few daily rituals that feel collective. Perhaps the food is simple. Cornbread, stew, greens, salted fish, a little pork, beans, whatever can be grown, traded, rationed, caught, stretched, or seasoned into something sustaining. The smell of simmering food fills the room and softens the edges of the day. Adults eat tired, children eat quickly, then slower when sleep begins tugging at their faces. Conversation may remain careful, especially if walls are thin or white ears are near, but family life settles around the shared pot all the same. Even laughter survives. That matters. A joke about somebody snoring, a child making a face at the bitter taste of medicine, a sly comment about a pompous white man who thinks himself very grand while tripping over a chicken in the yard. Humour is not a denial of pain. It is part of how people remain larger than pain. Oppression always wants the oppressed to appear only as victims or only as labour. Laughter refuses both reductions. Yet there is no avoiding the shadow hanging over these households. Sale, transfer, inheritance, debt, death of an owner, marriage of an owner's daughter, a failing crop, a business loss. Any of these can trigger separation. You hear it in the quiet way adults mention names. You see it in the way people memorize one another's features, the shape of a hand, the sound of a voice, the scar near an eyebrow, the exact way a child runs. Memory becomes practical because permanence cannot be trusted. Newspapers of the period sometimes preserve this pain accidentally. A runaway notice may mention that a man is suspected of trying to reach his wife on another plantation. A sale notice may list a woman with several children. An estate division may split people among heirs without recording their protests. The paper is dry. The human meaning is not. Behind every such line there may be nights of pleading, bargaining, weeping, silence, and forced composure. Some owners present themselves as protectors of enslaved families when it suits them. They speak of allowing marriages, of keeping mothers with infants, of rewarding loyalty by limiting separation. Such claims appear in letters and memoirs with a self-satisfied glow. One reads them with caution. Any kindness that depends entirely on the continuing choice of the person with power is not security. It is permission. Permission can be withdrawn. There is also the terrible fact of sexual exploitation, which shaped family life in ways the records often veil. Enslaved women were vulnerable not only to labour demands and sale, but also to coercion by white men whose power over them was immense. The result could be pregnancies, children, silence, gossip, household tension, and forms of trauma the archive only partially reveals. This subject must be handled gently, but it cannot be omitted. Family life under slavery was shaped not only by affection and separation, but also by violations imposed from above. Scholars still argue over how openly such realities were acknowledged within white households, because the evidence is fragmented, self-serving, or coded. But nobody should mistake silence in the records for absence in lived experience. Women understood danger. Communities understood it too. In free black households, family life could hold more legal stability, but never full ease. Free couples still faced racism, economic precarity, and the threat of kidnapping or wrongful enslavement. Employment could be insecure. Housing options could be restricted. White officials could interfere. Still, free black families created homes, businesses, religious ties, and mutual support networks that offered a different model of domestic life, one grounded more firmly in chosen bonds and legal personhood. However incomplete the surrounding society remained, you pass one such household in town, a candle burns near the window, a man repairs a shoe while a woman folds cloth beside him, a child has fallen asleep with one cheek against the table. The room smells of wax, leather, and onions cooked earlier. It is modest, but its rhythm feels slightly different, less watched, less contingent, not safe in every sense, no, but shaped more by the people inside it than by a distant owner's whim. That difference may be narrow on paper and enormous in feeling. Naming is another part of family life worth noticing. Children may carry names passed through generations, names chosen for kin, names drawn from scripture, names shaped by African memory, English custom, or local adaptation. Naming is intimate. It tells a child, you belong somewhere, even when owners rename, shorten, mock, or substitute names for convenience. Private naming practices can persist underneath. A family may hold one name in its own mouth and hear another shouted by power. Identity often survives in this split space. So do stories. At night, children listen. They hear tales with moral lessons, jokes, warnings, fragments of remembered places, accounts of clever people outwitting fools, stories of spirits, Bible scenes, family histories, practical instructions disguised as entertainment. Storytelling does what legal documents cannot. It places a child inside a people, not inside an inventory. It says you come from somewhere. You are not just what they call you. Touch becomes precious in such a world. A hand over a sleeping child's back, braiding hair by firelight, a couple sitting knee to knee for a few quiet minutes, an elder rubbing sore shoulders after labour. The human body, so often used by force during the day, becomes a site of comfort at night when family can reclaim it briefly for gentleness. That contrast is almost unbearable once you notice it. There is one more layer: grief. Families under slavery do not merely fear separation. They live with frequent small bereavements even when no one has died. A husband sent away, a daughter hired out, a son sold, a baby buried, a mother too exhausted to speak, a grandmother left on another property. Loss enters by degrees as well as by catastrophe. Mourning must often be folded into the next morning's chores, because labour does not pause respectfully for sorrow. And still family remains one of the strongest things in the whole landscape. Not strongest in the sense of protected, certainly not. Strongest in the sense of persistent. It keeps forming despite every incentive against it. It keeps teaching children how to move through danger. It keeps offering comfort after humiliation. It keeps making claims the law refuses to honour. It keeps insisting in gesture after gesture that human beings belong first to one another in love and responsibility, not to a ledger. The fire burns lower now. Children's heads nod. Someone lays another bit of wood on the embers and the room glows softly for a moment. The voices sink. Outside, the dark thickens over yard and road. Inside, a mother pulls cloth over a sleeping child. A man leans back against the wall, too tired to move just yet. An older woman whispers a prayer so low you almost miss it. Family is here, fragile and real, made not secure by the world around it, but precious precisely because the world keeps trying to break it. Even in a world built to exhaust you, joy does not vanish. It hides, it waits, it slips through cracks. You notice it first in sound, not the loud sound of a fair or parade, not the public music of people eager to be admired, but the quieter kind that gathers after labour when the body is frayed and the mind needs somewhere softer to rest. A low hum over a kettle, hands tapping a rhythm against a table edge, a tune carried under the breath while someone folds cloth, the murmur of prayer in a room lit by one candle. These are not grand performances. They are shelters made from voice. You step into an evening gathering, small enough to avoid attention. The room is close and warm. Smoke clings to the beams. A pot near the hearth gives off the comforting smell of greens, onions, and something salted simmering together. People sit on the stools, chests, the floor. Any place that offers a little support after the day's work. A child is curled asleep against an older sister's shoulder. Someone tears bread and passes it along. Someone else laughs at a remark too quiet for the whole room to catch, and the laughter spreads anyway, because tired people are often ready to be rescued by the smallest thing. This is one of the most important truths of black life in 1770. The system does not succeed in reducing people to labour alone. Enslaved and free black Americans create community through worship, music, food, storytelling, courtship, humour, shared memory, mutual care, and tiny ceremonies of ordinary pleasure. These moments are not decorations around suffering. They are part of survival itself, Faith is one place where this becomes especially visible. Religion in colonial America is messy, uneven, and deeply shaped by power. Some white Christians defend slavery with alarming confidence, quoting scripture as if the Bible were a padlock. Others object, especially among certain Quaker communities and a smaller number of evangelical voices. Black Americans move through this world with their own spiritual intelligence, taking what can nourish, resisting what degrades, and carrying traditions that did not begin in white churches. You enter a space used for prayer. Perhaps it's a corner of a cabin after dark, perhaps a brush arbor hidden from easy view, perhaps a meeting where black worshippers sit apart within a larger congregation, listening to sermons that may comfort and wound in the same hour. The air is close with breath, damp wool, and candle smoke. A voice begins softly, not polished, not trained for display, but grounded. Others answer. The sound swells and settles like breathing together. Prayer offers many things at once: consolation, warning, hope, moral language through which to judge the world. The story of Exodus carries obvious power. So do promises of divine justice, dignity, and deliverance. Yet black religious life in 1770 is not just the passive receiving of Christian teaching from white ministers. It is adaptation, interpretation, and selection. People weave inherited African sensibilities, local custom, biblical imagery, and lived suffering into something both communal and deeply personal. Historians still debate exactly how much continuity can be traced between specific West and Central African spiritual traditions and later African American religious practices. Especially this early in the colonial period, the evidence is scattered, and white observers often misunderstood what they saw. But the larger truth is not in doubt. Cultural memory remained alive, sometimes openly, sometimes in fragments, sometimes folded so carefully into new forms that only the pattern, not the original cloth, could still be seen. Music carries this memory beautifully. A melody rises in the room and seems to change the air itself. Feet tap softly on the floorboards. A hand slaps a knee in steady time. Another voice joins, then another. The tune may be simple, but simplicity is not emptiness. Repetition can soothe. Rhythm can bind a room together. A song can hold grief and comfort at once, which is useful because colonial life offers both in generous supply. You should not imagine these musical moments only as solemn. Some are playful, some are teasing, some are flirtatious, some are made for children, some carry coded meaning, some are simply there to make a weary evening feel less empty. The human voice becomes an instrument always available, impossible to confiscate entirely. That fact alone feels like a small miracle. In some places, drums and other percussive traditions survive more visibly than in others, though white fear often targets them because rhythm gathers bodies, and gathered bodies make slave societies nervous. Not without reason. A people who can keep time together can keep other things together too. Food, too, becomes a site of joy, despite scarcity. No one should romanticize hunger. Many black Americans in 1770 live with inadequate rations, seasonal shortages, and daily meals far below comfort. Yet within these limits, remarkable culinary intelligence flourishes. Gardens are tended where possible. Fish is caught, herbs are used, greens are cooked down, corn is transformed in many ways. Pepper, onion, smoke, fat, and patience become tools of dignity. The same society that undervalues black humanity often depends heavily on black cooking to feed its households well. That irony would be amusing if it were not also infuriating. You lean closer to a pot and smell something earthy and rich. Steam dampens your face. A woman tastes, nods slightly, and adds one more pinch of seasoning she has saved carefully. That gesture contains a whole philosophy. Even when resources are thin, flavor matters, care matters. A meal can say more than full stomach, though that matters too. It can say home, memory, skill, self-respect, generosity. A quirky detail drifts in here from the broader colonial world. White families sometimes praise a dish as exceptionally fine while giving little thought to the black hands and black knowledge that made it so. One imagines them speaking with solemn authority about household excellence, apparently unaware that the true genius is standing near the fire, trying not to roll her eyes. History would be unbearable without these little flashes of absurdity. Storytelling fills the room after the meal, voices lower, children stay awake longer than they should. Someone begins a tale about a clever trickster, a foolish braggart, a spirit in the woods, a warning from long ago, a Bible figure made vivid and immediate. Stories teach without announcing themselves as lessons. They also preserve humour, ancestry, values, and group identity. In a world where official records flatten black people into property, stories return depth. They give children a social world crowded with characters, consequences, wit, and memory. Some tales likely carry roots reaching back across the Atlantic, reshaped in the Americas through new surroundings and new pressures. Others are built from the local landscape itself, from swamps, roads, rivers, kitchens, markets, and plantation lanes. Every story says, in its own way, we are still making meaning here. Courtship and companionship also belong in this hidden geography of joy. A young man lingers a little longer near a gate. A young woman adjusts a head wrap and pretends not to notice him noticing. A pair of hands brush while passing a bowl. A glance is held for one beat too long. These things matter. Attraction, vanity, tenderness, and playful pride survive even under coercion. People still want to be admired. They still want to choose and be chosen where choice is available. Clothing can become part of this quiet self-expression. The material may be coarse, the wardrobe small, the conditions restrictive, but a ribbon, a knot, a fold, a patch made neatly, a head wrap tied with flair. These details can carry personality. In oppressive systems, style often becomes both pleasure and statement. Not a revolution, perhaps, but certainly not surrender. Laughter returns again and again in these spaces. You hear it when someone imitates a pompous white voice too perfectly. You hear it when an elder pretends sternness and then cracks. You hear it in children's shrieks over a game improvised from almost nothing. You hear it in the shared recognition that authority can be ridiculous even when it is dangerous. Gentle sarcasm thrives here for excellent reasons. When the powerful take themselves very seriously, humour becomes a lantern, small, warm, and surprisingly bright. Community also grows through practical kindness. A woman watches another's child while a chore is finished. A man shares a scrap of tobacco. Someone mends a shirt not because they are asked, but because they can see the need. Someone else passes along news from town, from a dock, from a churchyard, from a traveller. Mutual aid is not a slogan in this world. It is the difference between coping and collapse. You notice how these gatherings use the senses to reclaim life from toil. The softness of worn cloth after a day spent in rough labour. The relief of taking shoes off swollen feet. The sweetness of molasses on a spoon given to a child as a treat. Candlelight catching on a cheekbone. The smell of the herbs crushed for tea. The low warmth of another person seated close enough that your shoulders touch. Nothing here is extravagant. That is partly why it feels so moving. Joy does not need grandeur. It needs room, however small, to breathe. Free black communities and towns often create somewhat broader social spaces for such life. They may gather through churches, mutual support, trades, family homes, and neighbourhood ties. These circles can nurture music, conversation, business connections, courtship, and shared religious practice with a degree of self-direction less available under direct household slavery. But even here, safety is not guaranteed. White suspicion remains near. Public assembly can draw scrutiny. Economic strain can limit every plan. Still, the existence of free black communal life in 1770 matters greatly. It proves that black social worlds were not merely reactive. They were creative, structured, and sustaining. There is uncertainty in the record, as always. White observers often noticed black gatherings only when they wished to regulate them, mock them, or exoticize them. That means historians must reconstruct joy through fragments, reading against the grain of hostile sources, a dance glimpsed in a diary, a prayer meeting complained about in a letter, a food item noted in an account, a holiday gathering mentioned with condescension. Scholars continue arguing over how visible or hidden some practices truly were in different regions. Yet the broad picture remains clear enough. Community lived, music lived, faith lived, pleasure lived. Even holidays could be transformed. Certain days, especially around Christmas in some colonies, might bring slightly altered rhythms, visits between plantations, more food than usual, more music, more chance for gathering. These occasions were shaped by white custom and white permission in many cases, but black people used them for their own purposes too, strengthening ties, exchanging news, choosing partners, and resting where rest could be seized. A gift granted from above can still be repurposed from below. You step outside for a moment and hear the night around the house. Crickets, a distant dog, wind rubbing leaves together. Then from inside comes a song again, slower now, and you feel how sound can change a whole patch of darkness. The room behind you is still poor. The people in it are still constrained. Tomorrow's labour has not vanished. Yet something strong is present there that the system cannot fully price or command. Dignity has many shapes. Sometimes it is a prayer spoken with conviction. Sometimes a story remembered correctly. Sometimes a bowl of food seasoned well. Sometimes a room choosing laughter when bitterness would be easier. Sometimes a song rising from tired bodies and making the air feel larger than the walls. That is why these hidden joys matter so much. They are not proof that suffering was somehow softened into acceptability. They are proof that black Americans remained fully human in a society organized to deny that fact. They made beauty under pressure. They made fellowship under surveillance. They made warmth where the law offered none. The candle burns lower. A final joke earns a softer laugh this time. Children are lifted, guided, tucked down to sleep. A woman hums while rinsing the last bowl. A man sits with his hands open over his knees, listening to the quiet settle. Someone whispers a closing prayer, and the room answers with a murmur so gentle it almost blends with the fire. For a little while, the world inside those walls belongs more to the people living in it than to the system outside. That is no small thing. Not all resistance arrives with a shout. Much of it barely disturbs the air. You begin to notice this in the smallest motions, the ones a hurried observer would miss. A pause held half a second longer than necessary. A tool set down with studied innocence. A message carried in a slightly altered form. A face kept calm while the mind works furiously underneath. In 1770, for black Americans living under slavery and racial control, resistance often lives in the narrow space between what power demands and what a person can still withhold. The colony fears rebellion, of course. White colonists tell themselves stories at night about uprisings, secret plots, poison, fire, weapons hidden in walls, meetings under moonlight, coded drums rolling danger through the dark. Those fears are not imagined from nothing. Enslaved people do resist in organized ways at times, and slave societies know it. But the more constant truth is quieter. Daily life produces smaller acts. Repeated so often they form a second hidden history beneath the official one. You see it first in work. A field looks orderly enough from a distance. Bodies move in rows. Hoes rise and fall. Baskets fill. An overseer on horseback might glance over the scene and believe control is complete. Yet close up, the day is full of judgment calls. How fast to move, how carefully to sort, which repair can wait, whether a tool is really broken or merely inconvenient, whether a task is understood exactly as ordered or interpreted more creatively. Labour offers countless opportunities for subtle adjustment, and subtle adjustment can become defiance. A man draws out a chore by just enough to protect his strength. A woman takes longer over a task that no one else knows how to finish properly. A worker uses the weaker edge of a tool on purpose so the pace naturally slows. Another pretends not to hear the first command, forcing it to be repeated. Nothing here looks dramatic. That is the point. Resistance does not always aim to announce itself. Sometimes it aims to survive another week with a little more dignity and a little less bodily ruin. White observers often call this laziness. That word deserves suspicion. In the mouths of enslavers, laziness can mean exhaustion, caution, grief, illness, quiet sabotage, or simply refusing to offer superhuman enthusiasm to the person stealing your life. It is one of those convenient labels power uses when it cannot imagine that the governed might have their own reasons. You walk into a kitchen where resistance takes another form. A woman measures flour, stirs a pot, wipes a knife, and answers questions in a tone so steady it reveals nothing. Yet within the routine she chooses what to mention and what to keep to herself. She passes a piece of bread to a child when no one is looking. She delays a message by a minute because that minute matters. She remembers every conversation in the household more accurately than the people having them. Domestic spaces generate intelligence, and intelligence can be used quietly. Information is one of the great currencies of resistance. Who is ill? Who is travelling? Who is in debt? Which road is watched? Which owner is drunk at night? Which mistress keeps keys poorly? Which sailor is sympathetic? Which church member may help? Which constable can be misdirected? News moves by whisper, gesture, memory, and timing. In a world where Black Americans are watched constantly, the ability to gather and share information becomes a form of power in itself. You feel that power in the way people listen. An enslaved coachman waiting near a doorway hears political talk not meant for him. A dock worker hears sailors speak of routes, weather, and ships leaving soon. A maid dressing her mistress hears family plans, debts, quarrels, fears. A hired-out artisan crosses neighbourhoods and sees who is building, who is leaving, who is hiring, who has gone bankrupt. White society often mistakes enforced closeness for invisibility. It assumes the black person in the room is present only as labour. That mistake can be costly. A curious little absurdity slips in here. Some white colonists become so accustomed to being served that they speak freely in front of the very people most likely to use that information cleverly. There is a special kind of arrogance that believes carrying a tray also prevents hearing. Colonial America had a generous supply of it. Literacy belongs in this hidden history too. Learning to read or write can be difficult and dangerous, depending on region and circumstance. But Black Americans do pursue literacy where possible. Some learn letters from children, from sympathetic adults, from religious instruction, from observation, from scraps of discarded paper. The act itself can be radical. Reading lets a person understand passes, notices, scripture, names, maps, contracts, and opportunities. Writing can produce forged permissions, secret notes, remembered names, private records of selfhood. Historians still debate how widespread literacy was among enslaved people in 1770, because evidence is uneven and often indirect. But nobody should assume ignorance simply because the archive was built by those who preferred black knowledge to remain hidden. Movement offers another field for quiet resistance. A person sent on an errand may take a route that allows a needed exchange of news. A visit to market becomes a moment to see kin, arrange help, or study escape possibilities. A journey with livestock creates cover for conversation. A trip to fetch water allows 5 precious minutes out of the direct line of command. Each task imposed from above may contain small, usable openings within it. Not freedom, no, but room. And room matters. Then there is the oldest and most obvious form of refusal. Running away. Not every escape aims at permanent freedom. Some people flee briefly to protest treatment, avoid punishment, visit family or reclaim time. Others seek lasting escape into towns, swamps, ships, indigenous territory, or distant colonies. Each flight carries enormous risk. Dogs, patrols, advertisements, betrayal, hunger, exposure. Yet people run because staying can also be unbearable, and because movement itself challenges the claim of ownership. A runaway notice is, among other things, a tiny printed confession that the enslaver's control was never as complete as he wished. You stand in a print shop and imagine one such notice drying on the page. It describes clothing, scars, manner of speech, suspected destinations, maybe a skill that makes the person especially valuable. The wording tries to turn escape back into property loss. But read another way. The same notice reveals intelligence, planning, family ties, courage, and a living refusal to remain where the law placed you. Resistance also takes spiritual form. Prayer meetings can become places not only of worship but of mutual strengthening. Biblical stories of deliverance can sharpen the moral imagination. A person told all day that obedience is the highest virtue may hear, instead that Pharaoh was judged and captives were seen. Song can reinforce that understanding. So can the simple act of gathering beyond the full control of white supervision. White authorities often sense this possibility, which is why they watch black gatherings nervously. Even a hymn can feel dangerous when sung by people expected to remain grateful for bondage. Healing practices belong here too, an herb chosen carefully, a poultice prepared from remembered knowledge, a body rested when illness might otherwise be ignored. Black healers, midwives, and knowledgeable elders hold forms of practical power that do not always depend on white approval. Sometimes that knowledge serves the whole community. Sometimes it can also be withheld selectively, or used to create a little leverage in a world short on it. White households may rely on black medical skill while never admitting how much authority lives in those capable hands. You move through a yard where children play, and even here resistance has its place. A child learns early when to keep silent, when to look harmless, when to carry a message exactly, when to forget it strategically, when to slip into adult company unnoticed. Childhood does not erase the political world, it trains for it. Games may include imitation, trickery, daring, and little tests of cleverness that mirror the larger demands of life. Knowledge is passed down in tones so ordinary that outsiders may hear nothing at all. There is also resistance in self-presentation. To keep clothing neat when possible, to braid hair carefully, to stand upright, to preserve a name, a prayer, a recipe, a courtship custom, a burial practice, a family tie, a way of speaking that belongs to your people. None of this breaks chains by itself, but every oppressive system wants to define the oppressed completely. Maintaining selfhood is a refusal of that definition. It says you may command my labour, but you do not get effortless possession of my inner life. Some forms of resistance edge closer to direct confrontation. Theft from masters, especially food, cloth, tools, or small items, appears frequently in accusations from the period. White colonists call it criminality. Black Americans living under deprivation might call it taking back a fraction of what was already stolen. The moral language changes sharply depending on who is doing the speaking. A piece of meat taken from a smokehouse means something different when your labour stocked that smokehouse in the first place. Sabotage can be harder to prove and therefore easier to deny. A fence left weak, a harness repaired badly on purpose, a tool misplaced, a crop handled carelessly, a fire allowed to die, an animal let loose. Accidents happen constantly in colonial life, which makes them a useful cover. Historians must be cautious here, because not every mishap was resistance. Fatigue and rough conditions genuinely produced mistakes. Still, enslavers themselves often feared intentional damage, which tells you they understood perfectly well how vulnerable their authority could be. White fear grows especially sharp around poison and arson. These possibilities haunt slave societies because they strike from below and expose the intimacy of dependence. The person who cooks your food, tends your room, or handles your stores already stands inside your household's fragile sense of safety. Evidence for specific cases can be murky, distorted by panic or prejudice, and scholars continue to debate how often accusations of poisoning masked ordinary illness or racial fantasy. Yet the fear itself is revealing. It shows that power never feels fully secure when it rests on coercion. In towns, free black Americans resist differently, but no less meaningfully. They build networks of support, acquire property when possible, negotiate wages, petition authorities, join churches, create households, and guard one another against kidnapping or harassment. A free black artisan establishing a reputation, a woman maintaining an independent household, a group pooling resources for mutual aid. These acts may appear simply practical. They are also political. They carve out space where white society prefers precarity. Resistance can be emotional too, though the archive barely knows how to see it. The refusal to admire an owner, the decision to mock him in private, the inward rejection of the names he gives you. the effort to remember your mother correctly when the law would classify her only as property, the choice to love your child expansively in a world designed to price that child. These are not small things. They keep the mind from collapsing into the categories imposed upon it. You hear this emotional resistance in tone, a clipped answer, a neutral voice hiding contempt, a joke told after dark that restores proportion by making the powerful seem foolish again. Gentle sarcasm is not a revolution. Perhaps, but it does excellent work in preserving sanity. People who must flatter by day often become superb connoisseurs of nonsense by night. There is uncertainty, naturally, in how much of this can be pinned down case by case. Historians work with runaway notices, court records, plantation books, letters of complaint, church discipline, oral tradition, archaeology, and later recollections. Those sources reveal patterns, but they do not always let us label each act confidently. Was a broken tool sabotage or exhaustion? Was a delay intentional or unavoidable? Was a sickness feigned or real? The ambiguity itself is part of the story. Hidden resistance survives precisely because it often leaves no perfect proof. That does not make it less real. It makes it intelligent. You pause at the edge of a field in late afternoon. Sunlight lies warm on the rows, insects buzz over the crop. From a distance, the scene looks composed, almost serene. Yet inside it lives 1,000 private calculations, little refusals, concealed loyalties, remembered roots, measured silences, and tactical kindnesses. Power sees bodies moving. It does not fully see minds working. And those minds never stop. A woman saving a crust, a man memorizing a road, a child learning a name, a sailor noting a departure, a worshipper hearing liberation in scripture, a cook passing news, a labourer slowing the pace just enough to keep something of himself intact, a fugitive stepping into darkness with no guarantee except that staying meant surrender. Each act alone may seem small. Together they form a long, continuous undermining of the system's favourite lie, the lie that domination creates consent. Even under the heaviest control, people keep making choices. Constrained choices, dangerous choices, or partial choices, but choices all the same. That is what resistance looks like here. Not only banners and battle cries, though history loves those because they photograph well in the imagination. More often it is a hidden current under the floorboards of ordinary life, steady and patient, wearing away at the claims of ownership through wit, memory, care, secrecy, skill, and the stubborn refusal to become exactly what the colony says you are. By evening, where the day's commands begin to thin, but the quieter work continues. News is exchanged, faces are read, plans are weighed, tools are hidden or kept ready, children are warned, names are remembered, a route is considered again, across the colonies, in fields and kitchens and docks and cabins and town rooms. Resistance moves softly enough to pass beside power without announcing itself. Softly, yes, but never weakly. Freedom exists here, but it does not relax. It stands with its shoulders tight, listening for trouble. You feel this the moment you enter a free black household in a colonial town, where the room carries a different kind of order from the ones shaped by direct enslavement. A bench sits where its owner chose to place it. A Bible rests on a shelf beside a folded cloth and a tin cup. Tools hang neatly from pegs. A loaf cools near the hearth, filling the air with the warm smell of baked grain. A child moves through the room with the careless speed children reserve for places that feel mostly their own. Mostly, that word matters. A free black family in 1770 may possess something precious and hard-won. A legal claim to self, the right, at least in theory, not to be bought and sold, the chance to work for wages, own household goods, make contracts, worship in a chosen place, and shape the rhythm of daily life more directly. These things matter immensely, yet freedom for black Americans in colonial society is never simple ease. It is narrow, documented, conditional, and watched. Paper often stands between freedom and danger. You see it folded carefully into a pocket tucked into a chest, wrapped in cloth, or stored where damp will not ruin it. A certificate of manumission, a freedom paper, a baptismal record, A bill of sale proving release, a court order, a tax receipt, a witness statement, any scrap that might persuade a suspicious constable, a hostile neighbour, or a greedy kidnapper that the person before them is not available for seizure. Imagine having to carry your own humanity in paper form. Imagine knowing rain, fire, theft, or one bad encounter could threaten that proof. The body feels freedom differently when it must remain ready to defend itself on demand. A free black man walking to work in town does not move with the ease of a white artisan. He may still be stopped and questioned. He may need to explain his business. He may keep his answers calm, exact, and short, because too much confidence can sound offensive and too much hesitation can sound guilty. A free black woman going to market with baskets or cloth may feel the same tightness in the chest. Not ownership, no, but exposure. The law may name her free. The street may still behave otherwise. That is one of the hardest truths in this period. Freedom and security are not the same thing. In some colonies, free black people can own property, at least in limited ways. They may rent or purchase homes, maintain gardens, keep tools, operate small businesses, or acquire livestock. A modest house with its own doorway, table, and lock can mean far more than material comfort. It means space arranged by the people living inside it. It means children sleeping where no owner can arbitrarily enter to move them elsewhere. It means the pot on the fire is yours to stir for your own family, not because someone else has ordered supper. The smell of food in such a room carries a different emotional weight. Onion, corn, herbs, hot bread, maybe a little fish, or stewed meat if fortune allows. The scent says not luxury, but possession in the most basic human sense. And yet that possession remains vulnerable. Debt can threaten it. White resentment can surround it. Local rules can narrow it. A free black property owner may still have fewer legal protections than a white one. A dispute with a white neighbour can become dangerous quickly if the court values one testimony over another. A free family may improve a house, patch the roof, whitewash the wall, sweep the yard, and still know that respectability does not guarantee respect. Work shapes this world too. Free black men and women in 1770 labour in a range of occupations, though opportunities are constrained by race, local custom, and competition with whites eager to protect their own status. Some work as sailors, dock workers, craftsmen, laundresses, cooks, seamstresses, midwives, carters, labourers, barbers, or small traders. Some hire out their own labour. A few establish stable reputations in town. Skill matters here, perhaps even more than elsewhere, because a free person often lives by the fragile bargaining power of competence. If you repair shoes well, build barrels properly, dress hair neatly, handle a boat safely, or nurse the sick with proven care, people may seek you out despite their prejudice. The prejudice does not vanish. It simply learns to coexist with need. Colonial society can be wonderfully shameless in this regard. It will doubt your equality at breakfast and rely on your expertise by dinner. A free black artisan may spend years building trust, only to discover that trust ends precisely where white comfort feels challenged. He can fix the wheel, mend the roof, and carry himself with sobriety, but still be excluded from certain guild spaces, contracts, political rights, or public honours. He is useful. That's not the same as accepted. The difference hums under every interaction like a low wire. Women navigate equally narrow ground. A free black woman may keep a household, sell food, wash linen, sew clothing, care for children, nurse the ill, or participate in market exchange with a sharp eye and steady hand. She may be a widow managing on her own, a wife balancing income with domestic work, or a mother making every bit of food and cloth stretch farther than should be possible. Her competence can hold a family together. It can also attract scrutiny, resentment, or exploitation. Independence in a black woman does not always inspire admiration in colonial society. Quite the opposite. It can provoke people who believe race and gender together should enforce quiet dependence. Churches and religious communities often provide some of the strongest anchors for free black life. Worship can offer more than prayer. It can create networks, witnesses, mutual aid, marriage recognition, burial support, and a sense of dignity larger than the surrounding world's prejudice. in a meeting after sunset, with candles burning low and benches creaking under tired bodies, a free black person may find one of the few public spaces where the soul is addressed before the status. The smell of wax, old wood, damp coats, and breath fills the room. A hymn rises, heads bow. For a while, the community hears itself speak in a moral language the colony does not fully control. There is still complexity here. Some churches segregate black worshippers, discipline them differently, or treat them as spiritual dependents rather than equals. Others provide more genuine room. Quaker communities in some places become especially important in anti-slavery discussion and black petitioning, though their record is not spotless or uniform. Historians still debate how far these religious openings extended in daily practice, because principle on paper often ran ahead of comfort in the pew. Even so, faith communities matter deeply, especially where civil society offers only partial shelter. Free black families also build ties through marriage, kinship, godparent relationships, and neighbourhood help. A woman watches another's child while bread is sold at market. A man lends a tool to a neighbour whose repair work must be finished by morning. A sailor carries news from another port. An elder remembers names, births, and deaths with the authority of someone who knows memory itself is a social duty. These networks can be life-saving. They warn of kidnappers. They witness status. They confirm identity. They help people survive illness, childbirth, bereavement, and temporary want. Kidnapping is one of the ugliest shadows hanging over free black life. A legally free person can still be seized unlawfully and sold into slavery, especially if travelling alone, lacking papers, or moving through unfamiliar territory. The possibility is not imaginary. It is part of the atmosphere. This means that travel carries special tension. A road is never just a road. A wharf is never just a wharf. A stranger's question is never simply friendly curiosity until proved otherwise. The smell of river mud, horse sweat, wet rope, and salt air can mix with something sharper inside the body. A constant readiness to judge threat. That readiness shapes behaviour. People keep copies of papers where possible. They travel with known companions. They cultivate respectable witnesses. They choose routes carefully. They stay attentive to white men who ask too many questions in too casual a tone. Freedom becomes not only a legal category, but a practiced defence. Children raised in free black households inherit both the blessing and the burden of this condition. They may grow up seeing parents make choices about work, prayer, food, and home life that enslaved families are denied. That matters tremendously. A child who sees a father bargain over wages or a mother decide what to buy at market receives a lesson in agency. Yet the same child also learns caution early. Do not lose the papers. Do not answer foolishly to a constable. Do not wander too far. Do not assume kindness from every white face. Freedom teaches posture and vigilance together. Education, where available, becomes especially valuable. Reading and writing can help protect status, support trade, preserve records, and widen thought. Some free black children receive informal instruction at home, through churches, from sympathetic teachers, or in small community efforts. Literacy can turn paper from a threat into a tool. A person who can read a notice, sign a name, keep an account, or understand a legal phrase has gained something more than skill. He or she has gained leverage in a world that prefers confusion at the bottom and clarity at the top. There is scholarly uncertainty in the exact scale of formal education among free black communities in 1770, because the evidence remains uneven and often filtered through white institutions that recorded black learning only when it became unusually visible. But the fragments are enough to show determined effort. Parents wanted children equipped. Communities understood the value of letters, memory, and testimony. You walk through a port district in late afternoon and see free black labourers returning from work. Boots dusty, sleeves rolled, faces tired, the harbour smells of brine, tar, and old fish. Gull cries cut across the air. Men speak in low tones about wages, routes, weather, rumours, and opportunities. There is a kind of guarded pride here. These workers are not labouring under a master's direct claim, yet neither are they allowed the unmarked dignity granted to white tradesmen. They occupy a tense middle space, visible, capable, necessary, and never fully trusted. Some free black men serve in maritime worlds where movement broadens the horizon. Ships connect colonies, islands, and ideas. A sailor may hear political debate in one port and religious talk in another. He may observe different racial customs, different opportunities, different dangers. Sea life is harsh and unstable, but it can widen knowledge in ways that matter. News travels through black hands as well as white ones, and free people often stand at the centre of that circulation. A small but telling detail appears in town records and scattered observations. Free black people sometimes dress with notable care when circumstances allow. Clean linen, a proper coat, a neat cap, a polished shoe. Not extravagance, but presentation. Clothing here is not vanity alone, it is evidence, defence, and self-assertion all at once. To appear orderly, respectable, and composed is to push back against a society eager to read. Black freedom is disorderly or undeserved. One well-tied neckcloth can carry a quiet argument. Still, respectability has limits. A finely dressed free black man can still be insulted. A competent free black woman can still be patronised or blocked. A property owner can still be denied political voice. A church member can still be seated apart. A veteran of honest labour can still be treated as suspect. This is why free black life in 1770 often feels emotionally double. Pride exists, so does strain. Achievement exists, so does precarity. You sense that doubleness most clearly at day's end. In a free household, the door closes from the inside. The sounds of the street soften. Someone banks the fire. Someone counts coins earned that day, smoothing them on the table with tired fingers. A child recites letters or a prayer. A woman folds cloth while listening to a neighbour describe troubling news. A man checks his papers once more, not because he's forgotten where they are, but because certainty so rarely lasts in the mind unless touched by the hand. The room smells of soap, warm bread, smoke, and damp wool drying near the hearth. There is comfort here, real comfort, but it never fully loosens its grip on caution. Freedom, then, is not false. It is real. It allows choices that slavery denies. It creates homes, marriages, businesses, congregations, ambitions, and forms of dignity that matter immensely. It gives shape to a future, even a narrow one. It allows a person to say my wages, my room, my child, my decision, my prayer, my name. Those are no small words, but in 1770 for black Americans, freedom remains hemmed in by a society that mistrusts it, challenges it, and at times seeks to reverse it. It is a lamp kept burning in a windy place, bright enough to guide, never safe enough to ignore. You stay a little longer in that lamplit room, listening to the quiet talk of people who have carved out a life under pressure. The table is plain, the walls are rough, the future is uncertain, yet the room holds something unmistakable, chosen order, earned warmth, care defended against the world outside. Freedom may not rest here easily, but it lives here. The air is turning restless now. You can feel it in the streets, in the taverns, in the print shops, in the nervous speed of horses sent with messages, in the way men gather under signs swinging above the road and speak with rising heat about rights, burdens, taxes, troops, and the future. The colonies in 1770 are not calm places. White political anger is sharpening into something louder and more organised, and the word liberty is beginning to echo with almost theatrical force. It is spoken over ale and candlelight, over account books and maps, over dinner tables and courthouse steps. Liberty, rights, tyranny, representation. It is all very stirring, and for black Americans, it is impossible not to hear the strain in that music. You walk through a town at evening where pamphlets pass from hand to hand. The air smells of ink, smoke, wet stone, and stale beer drifting from an open tavern door. Inside, white colonists lean forward over tables, debating Parliament, soldiers, duties, resistance, boycotts, and honour. Outside, black workers carry water, sweep yards, haul goods, and wait at doors while those same arguments grow grander by the hour. The contrast is almost too sharp to bear. Men who resent being governed from far away may still feel entirely at ease governing the bodies of people standing within arm's reach. This is the threshold you have arrived at, not the revolution in full blaze yet, but the emotional weather that will feed it. In 1770, the memory of the Boston Massacre is fresh. British authority feels more intrusive to many colonists. Newspapers carry argument after argument. Merchants complain. Lawyers write. Crowds gather. Committees talk. A whole political language of resistance is swelling in public life. White Americans increasingly picture themselves as a people threatened with enslavement by a distant power. That metaphor is used often and with great confidence. It lands differently when heard by people who know actual enslavement not as a metaphor, but as the ordinary condition of mourning. You can imagine the bitter intelligence with which black listeners heard these claims. Enslaved men at docks, enslaved women in kitchens, free black sailors in taverns, servants moving quietly through rooms where patriot speeches are delivered with flushed cheeks and uplifted hands. They hear white colonists speak of chains, bondage, corruption, arbitrary power, and violated rights. The words are familiar. Their speakers are less convincing. That does not mean black Americans simply ignored revolutionary rhetoric. Far from it. Political language can be stolen, reshaped, and turned back on those who use it carelessly. If rights are natural, then whose rights? If liberty is sacred, then why the auction block? If tyranny is hateful, then what precisely is a plantation? If no man should be taxed without representation, then how can one man claim another as property? The coming crisis opens a moral fault line that black Americans can see with unusual clarity, because they are already standing inside it. You move near a print shop where broadside pages hang to dry. Their surface smells metallic with ink. Fingers blackened by type and press labour stack the sheets. Printed words have a strange life in this century. Once released, they travel farther than the speaker can control. Some are meant to inspire resistance against Britain. Some denounce corruption. Some defend order. Some discuss trade. Yet the language of rights, once circulating, acquires a dangerous elasticity. It can stretch farther than its original authors intended. Black readers and listeners do not need to be formally invited into that language to recognize its possibilities. That possibility is not purely hopeful. It is also deeply uncertain. For enslaved people, the coming political conflict could mean disruption, military movement, shortages, opportunities for escape, new demands for labour, harsher surveillance, or all of these at once. War does not arrive as abstract principle to people already living under pressure. It arrives as noise, marching, requisition, rumour, hunger, disorder, and sudden chances mixed with sudden danger. A white master's political outrage does not automatically improve the condition of the enslaved person hearing it. Sometimes it worsens it. Still, the atmosphere of upheaval matters. In ordinary years, power can feel immovable because it is familiar. In anxious years, familiar power begins making mistakes. Men become distracted. Roads become busy. Lines of authority stretch thin. News outruns certainty. A world in argument with itself leaves openings. Black Americans understand this, sometimes intuitively, sometimes through careful observation, sometimes through direct political thought more sophisticated than white society wishes to admit. You see that thought in the choices of free black communities, especially in towns. Free men listen to debate and weigh its meaning. Free women hear the same speeches and judge the distance between rhetoric and practice. Church leaders, artisans, labourers, sailors, and householders all must consider what shifting authority might bring. More danger, more promise. Both at once. Freedom in such a moment does not mean merely having legal status. It means having to read the future with unusual caution. The future is full of rumours. The British may offer freedom to the enslaved. The colonists may recruit black labour or service in the name of liberty. New laws may come. Old controls may tighten. Trade may falter. Markets may shrink. Crowds may turn violent. Soldiers may pass nearby. Ships may leave suddenly. Prices may rise. Talk becomes constant. You hear it in alleys, kitchens, prayer meetings, workshops, and wharves. Not all of it is true. That matters less than the fact that people are listening hard. Historians still argue over how widely revolutionary ideology had penetrated black communities by 1770 in a direct and organised way, because the evidence is partial and often mediated through white observers. Yet it is impossible to believe that black Americans remained untouched by the flood of political talk around them. They lived too close to power for that. They cooked while it spoke, they carried it across rooms, they loaded it onto ships, they watched it argue with itself in public. And because they watched closely, they could also measure the gap between performance and reality. A patriot may thunder against enslavement to Britain while owning human beings at home. A lawyer may praise natural rights while drafting documents that protect slave property. A merchant may boycott British imports while profiting from Atlantic commerce bound tightly to slavery. A minister may pray for freedom and preach obedience in the same breath. Colonial hypocrisy is no longer merely a local pattern now. It is becoming part of the founding drama of a new nation. That is what makes this threshold so important. Black Americans are not standing outside history waiting for white politics to determine whether they exist. They are already central to the economic and moral crisis of the colonies. Their labour has built the wealth that makes political defiance possible. Their presence exposes the lie at the centre of the liberty talk that excludes them. Their choices in the coming years will matter profoundly, whether through service, petition, flight, negotiation, endurance, or demands for emancipation. Even when white records treat them as background, they are standing in the front row of the contradiction. You walk into a harbour district where masts sway against the darkening sky. Rope taps wood in the evening wind. The water smells of salt, mud, tar, and distant rain. Sailors call from deck to dock. Somewhere nearby, a tavern erupts in cheers over some fresh political insult from London. A black boatman hears it while securing a line. An enslaved porter hears it while rolling a cask into storage. A free black sailor hears it, and perhaps wonders whether empire in conflict might open a road not available in peace. The sound of history changing is not noble music. Often it is just men shouting in rooms too warm with drink. On plantations, the threshold feels different. News arrives more slowly, often by travellers, newspapers carried in from town, overseers speaking to masters, or enslaved people passing information through labour networks. Yet even there the atmosphere shifts. Owners talk more urgently, their tempers sharpen, their anxieties show. A household already built on control becomes more brittle when outside politics seem unstable. That brittleness can create danger. It can also create openings. You notice the emotional complexity of this moment most in silence. Not every black American hearing liberty talk is hopeful. Some are disgusted, some amused, some wary, some calculating, some sincerely moved by the language even while recognizing the hypocrisy of its speakers. Human beings do not respond in one tidy chorus. That would be too convenient for historians and far too simple for life. One man may dream of escape through imperial war. Another may distrust all white promises equally. One woman may hear in the rhetoric of rights a spiritual truth larger than the speakers themselves. Another may hear only another set of words that will do nothing when her child is hungry tomorrow. All of these responses make sense. The sensory world keeps grounding you in what is real. Cold iron on a gate latch, candle grease cooling on a finger. The smell of damp wool, cloaks hung near a tavern fire. A newspaper crinkling in a careful hand. Mud pulling at shoes in a yard where no grand principle has changed the labour expected at dawn. A horse blowing steam into the night air while its rider hurries with political news. The body does not live in rhetoric. It lives in weather, work, hunger, risk, and brief chances. And yet words matter. Words create horizons. They make claims that can later be used, challenged, repeated, and expanded. Once a society begins praising liberty as a natural good, it has made a statement more dangerous than it may realize. Black Americans understand danger well enough to recognize opportunity when it hides inside contradiction. A free black man in a town may begin to think more sharply about petitioning. An enslaved woman may listen more closely to talk of British lines and military movement. A sailor may calculate routes differently. A church elder may frame prayer in a language that touches both heaven and politics. A young person may hear the word rights and keep it burning in the mind long after the white speaker who used it forgot his own sentence. Ideas do not always belong to those who first shout them. This threshold is not a promise of justice. It is a sharpening of the question. Who counts as part of the people? Who may claim liberty? Who may possess land, wages, family, body, future? Who may invoke law and expect to be heard? Who may be called a patriot? Who may be called a citizen? The colonies are moving toward a reckoning, but they are not moving toward honesty fast enough. Black Americans can see that clearly because they have spent their lives inside the gap. The night deepens now. Windows glow amber along the street. Somewhere, a fiddle plays faintly through a tavern wall. Somewhere else. An older woman folds away a freedom paper and says a quiet prayer. In a kitchen. A servant clears cups from a table where liberty was praised for hours. On a plantation lane. Someone repeats a rumour carried from town. In a dockside room, a sailor studies the harbour and listens to the wind. Across the colonies, Black Americans stand at the edge of a political storm not of their making, yet one that may alter their lives more than those cheering loudest for it. And so you remain there in the dark a little longer, watching candlelight tremble behind glass, hearing the far-off thud of hooves and the soft slap of water against pilings. The air is cooler now, touched with smoke and salt. The whole land seems to be holding its breath. A new age is approaching, full of arguments about freedom. Black Americans already know the cost of its absence. The noise of the day begins to soften. Voices blur into a low murmur. Firelight dims behind shutters. The harbour settles into gentle knocks of wood against water, slow and hollow in the dark. You let the night air rest cool against your skin and feel the sharp edges of the world begin to loosen. The talk of liberty, the weight of labour, the strain of fear, the stubborn pulse of hope. All of it drifts together now like smoke rising into a sky too wide to answer quickly. You imagine tired hands finally unclenching, a child sleeping deeply under a patched blanket, a mother breathing more evenly at last, a man listening to the quiet and allowing himself, for one small moment, not to calculate tomorrow. The roads are still there. The laws are still there. The dangers are still there. But night lays a softer cover over everything. The stars keep their patient distance. A breeze moves through the trees and carries the faint scent of ash, river water, and cooling earth. Somewhere in the dark, someone hums a tune too low to make out, and it seems enough. No speeches now, no ledgers, no orders, only the slow settling of a world that has taken much and explained little. So you stay with that hush. You let the candles burn lower in your mind. You let the street empty. You let the water keep its rhythm. You let the long century fade into shadow, until all that remains is the gentle sense of people enduring, resting where they can, and carrying themselves quietly through the dark toward another dawn.